With that, I'll go ahead and call the Sandy work session to order. It's a joint meeting between our Sandy City Council and our Planning Commission. Will you please call the roll, Jeff?
Sure, Mayor. So, Councilor Diesel.
Here.
Councilor Smallwood.
Here.
Eldon.
Here.
Councilor Walker.
Here.
Councilor Exner.
Present.
Councilor Hokinson.
Is excused.
Okay. Mayor Pulliam.
Here.
And I was not prepared to call the planning commission.
Oh, well, we only gave you a couple new names too, so it should be easy.
Oh, okay. Chair Crosby.
Present.
Okay. And bear with me. Okay. Commissioner Carlton, I believe, is not present yet. Commissioner Lasowski, not present at the moment. Commissioner McLean-Wenzel.
Here.
Commissioner Lee.
Here.
Commissioner Hook. I don't see yet. And finally, Commissioner Mayton.
I see.
I know he's here.
Yeah. And then we have a couple of our newly appointed commissioners who have yet to take office yet. All right. So with that, Jordan, do you want to we're obviously in a work session for the bypass feasibility study, transportation master planning. Jordan, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. So we do have a number of consultants here tonight, and I thought maybe what would be helpful to start is just to do introductions, given that we're doing this virtual hybrid meeting tonight. So it might be helpful for us to kind of go around and introduce who's here tonight, and who are they representing, what firm or what agency, and I think probably start with Rhea with DKS, if that's okay. That makes sense.
Sure. Thanks. Hi, I'm Rhea Flizakowski with DKS Associates. I'm the project manager for this. I don't know if you want any background or anything, but yeah, I've been doing transportation planning for a long time, about 22 years here in Portland. So thanks for having me tonight. And then, Jordan, you want me just to keep introducing, point to someone?
Thank you.
Okay, Doc, you want to go ahead?
I'm Doc Rosenthal, also with DKS Associates, and I've been working with Rhea and Kelly on the TSP. Have about 5 years of experience doing TSPs around Oregon and other long-range plans and other corridor studies with DKS.
Darcy, you want to go?
Hey, good evening. Thank you. I'm part of the consultant team. I'm Darcy Rudzinski with Angelo Planning Group, and we are land use planners working all over the state of Oregon and oftentimes with DKS. So we focus on the policy kind of framework for transportation system planning, as well as the regulatory considerations and implementation. So we are engaged now with helping the city look at policy amendments, as well as some tweaks to the code to set you up for future growth and consistency with your brand new updated transportation system plan. And helping me with that is my colleague, Emma.
Sorry, I was muted. Hi, I'm Emma Porcolo. I'm also from Angelo Planning Group, and I'm helping out Darcy on this project.
And I think that's it, right, Rhea?
Yep. For online consultants, yep, that's it for us.
I'll turn it back to you in just a minute, but just to set the stage for tonight. So it is a work session. We're asking for, in the staff report, you see that there's some decisions to be made, really is kind of direction on moving forward with both the bypass, but more importantly, it's the TSP and how the bypass maybe is incorporated into that TSP. And I think we're going to fill a good amount of time tonight just because, well, we all love talking about transportation and the future of transportation and projects and making connections and, roadways and where we should build them and all that fun stuff. And so we did include the slides in the packet, so you had them in advance and you kind of look at them in more detail as we go through it. But I always find these meetings to be kind of fun and exciting because it is talking about priorities and identifying projects to kind of build out our transportation system for the next, 20 years on this planning horizon. And Sandy, in a city that grows this fast, we tend to do these plans, I think every 10 years actually, is the last time we did our TSP. But so I think what the order of operation will be the bypass first, and a presentation about the bypass and the feasibility study. And then after that, I'm sure a conversation and questions about the report and kind of what's next with that, we'll jump into the TSP with the consultants sort of leading this conversation and this work session. So I expect a lot of conversation, a lot of discussion and questions, and yeah, hopefully a good time tonight to talk about transportation, and both big and small, from pathways to a highway bypass. So with
I apologize, Jordan and Mayor. There actually is one more. We do have Seth Brumley from ODOT.
Right.
Oh, great.
I thought there was going to be, there he is. Okay.
Hi, I'm Seth Brumley. I'm a transportation planner at ODOT Region 1, and I'm also the grant manager for this project. And I don't play a big role in this presentation, but I'm happy to answer questions from our perspective.
Great. Thank you, Seth.
So Ria, I'm going to turn it back to you and to start the presentation, or start the conversation, at least on the bypass, and the folks that will be kind of leading that.
Sure. So I wanted to make sure everyone did get their packet. I assume it has the slides from tonight. And then it also does have a fairly technical memo, but we wanted to make sure you guys had that Tech Memo 7, which is on the solutions. And it's kind of the background that's going to go with the slides that I'm going to present tonight on the transportation system plan. So just so I can't get quite in that detail, I want to make sure that you guys all have the memo with you tonight too. And then with that, I assume I should show my screen to go through the slides, or does everybody want to flip on paper and see faces? I assume you want to see the slides.
Yeah, please. Thank you.
Yes. Okay, so I want to make sure I can share my screen. Bear with me a moment. I'll go through the technical steps to get there. And then there we go. There we go. Does everyone see that okay?
That's good.
Good. Okay, and I will say, as the presenter, I mostly see my screen, and then I only see a couple of heads. So if someone sees someone raise their hand, please let me know, because I can't see everyone, and I don't mean to be rude to not call on you. I just can't see all 15 heads on my screen. And I would like to add that I definitely want this to be a conversation tonight. I love to talk about transportation. That's why I do what I do. So please, as we're going along, feel free to raise your hand or jump in and say, hey, Ray, I got a quick question. I'd like this to be much more of a work session as it is, with some dialogue, so we can make sure everyone's heard tonight. All right. So with that, yeah, this is for the Sandy Transportation System Plan. I'll be going through the slides tonight. Here's a little bit of an agenda that I put together of an overview of what we're going to talk about. I did try to estimate about how many minutes or the time that I needed for my presentation, but this doesn't include any discussion that we'll have with each of these sections. But you'll see this adds up to just over an hour. So while I do want to have a lively discussion tonight, I also want to make sure we keep moving a bit, just so we don't find ourselves at 10 o'clock at night and we haven't got to like the TSP questions yet. So let's try to have a good discussion, but be productive and keep moving as well. So I'm going to do a quick overview of where we're at the TSP process, just as a reminder. I know we haven't met for a while, so I want to make sure everyone has some context and knows where we're at. And then we are going to dive into the Sandy Bypass report. And then after that, I want to give you a summary of the community survey that we just conducted, so you can see what type of feedback we got from the locals. And then we will dive into the transportation system plan update and the needs and the solutions that we're at right now. So any additions or questions so far on the agenda? No, all good. Okay. Let's keep going. So let's do just a little bit of the TSP process. As a reminder, some people may be wondering, why are we even updating the TSP right now? Like, why are we spending all this time and money to do this? Well, Sandy's had several recent plans that have been updated, so it's important to make sure those get incorporated into the transportation system plan. The transit master plan was adopted last year. You just wrapped up your parks and trails master plan. Those both have connections to the transportation system. You also have the Pleasant Street master plan that was done a few years ago. And then we're currently working on finishing up the downtown walkability assessment. So it's all of those things need to be accounted for in your 20-year plan for the TSP. And then, as someone had mentioned, your current plan is from 2011, so it's becoming a bit outdated. So this TSP update will extend our planning horizon year out to the year 2040. We've also heard that we need to look at safety, walking, and biking priorities with a bit more definition and focus beyond what the 2011 TSP has. So we're doing that. We also have heard that we need to address congestion on the highway. So we will be incorporating any recommendations or findings that come out of the US 26 bypass study that we're going to go over tonight. And then we also need to take a look at alternative mobility targets for the highways. That's something that was evaluated and recommended through the last TSP update, but nothing has been adopted. So we're going to take a new look at those based on our new findings and data that we have and see if alternative mobility targets are still appropriate for the highway, and then work through those recommendations if needed to get those adopted. Then we'll also be providing a strategic investment plan. We really need to update the funding priorities for improvements and the type of projects and programs that can be funded the next 20 years. And then as Darcy had mentioned, updating the development code is a really important part of this. We want to make sure that any findings and recommendations or standards that come out of this TSP update are also consistent with the development code to make sure that you can implement those. All right, with that, any questions so far?
Can you clarify what alternative mobility targets are again?
Sure. So the Cliff Note version is ODOT has set mobility targets for signalized intersections on the highway. It's how much congestion is allowed, to be brief. And if there are intersections that can't meet the current target, and we don't have either desirable or reasonable mitigations that can get us to meet the target, you can make a policy decision to have alternative targets that would allow more congestion. And there's a whole procedure and process that goes with that, both technical and policy wise. And that's something we'll be looking at, because you'll see later in my presentation tonight, we know we have some intersections either currently or in the future that don't meet targets. And this is just one of the solutions that we can look at in how to make sure that those are meeting the state's targets.
Just to be clear though, Ria.
Oh, yeah.
To be clear though, is when all of a sudden we're meeting the new target, it's not because the behavior on the road has changed, it's because
Sure.
we moved the target.
Yep, we're moving the goal line back. Yes. Yeah, we would be allowing more congestion and saying that it meets the target. We would not be adding capacity. It's a policy decision, yeah, not like a physical improvement to the intersection. Correct. Anything else? Okay, I'll keep going. Again, feel free to interrupt me if you need to. Well, you guys can, on my screen, you can see the faces, can't you? All right, I just realized. How do I make this? Oh, is that better? Sorry, everyone. I was covering up my slides, right? Oh. All right, so I also want to just do a quick kind of check-in of where we're at in the project schedule in the process. So the top shows the schedule that we've been working on, and you can see I marked where we are right now. We've had several community advisory committee meetings. Up till now, we've had one online survey that was open to the public. And you can see we are planning on wrapping up the project in the winter and likely the spring of 2022. And what we've completed so far, looking at the bottom graphic, is we've gone through existing conditions and inventory. We've looked at future growth trends to see what we think the future motor vehicle demand will be. And we've gone through and updated the transportation goals that we'll be using for this project, and then how those relate to evaluation criteria that we'll be applying to the potential solutions, and that helps us prioritize what to spend money on the next 20 years. We've also gone through and looked at state and regional plans to make sure we're coordinating with those. We've gone through future conditions to see what the deficiencies and needs for all the modes will be in the year 2040. And then we've come up with some solutions for each of those modes. And we've evaluated, and then where I say we are here tonight is we are working on refining those draft solutions with community input. So that starts with this meeting here tonight. And then working on the next online survey once we get input from you all, so we can go out to the public and start getting what their feedback is on those draft solutions as well. And then after that, we start working towards what our preferred solutions are going to be and what the prioritizations are. And then we start working on a draft transportation system plan with a funding plan. That may include those alternative mobility standards or targets that we talked about. And then after that, we'll have an open house, we'll have public meetings. And then if all goes well, we would be taking the draft TSP through Planning Commission hearing and a City Council hearing with an adoption. So any questions on where we're at and where we're going? Okay, I assume silence means we're good. Okay. Oh, go ahead.
I don't think she heard you.
I said silence is good. You're good.
Oh, okay, I just want to make sure again. Now I don't see any heads bobbing up or down. So, all right. So let's jump into the bypass report. So we conducted a full feasibility reevaluation study. I want to make sure everyone was clear on what our objectives were. So we wanted to take a refresh of the bypass that is currently a project in the 2011 Sandy TSP. But we wanted to expand the measures that we were looking at beyond just that focused transportation look to perform a high-level benefit cost analysis. And the Sandy TSP update will consider those findings that come from that report, and they would be mixed in with other motor vehicle projects and priorities that come with the adopted TSP. The bypass project is a potential long-term and unfunded TSP solution right now, and it's focused at addressing mobility and local growth goals that could extend beyond 2040. So we started with coming up with a conceptual alignment. The current TSP does have kind of a very rough, just dashed, very high-level conceptual line on the motor vehicle map. And we wanted to start with that, but refine it a bit. So we did have a civil engineering firm on our team that helped us work out that alignment. It's still a very high level look, but making sure we were looking at, environmental constraints, topography, if there's any, creeks and other things like that, and property lines that we need to consider. So as you can see, this is still the rough alignment that we are looking at. It would still be located south of the Sandy urban growth boundary area. And it ends up being about just under 6 miles long. So you can see the west end would connect to US 26, a little west of Orient Drive. I think it's a couple thousand feet to the west. And that would require a new interchange. And then the east end would be connecting to US 26 at Furwood or Shorty's Corner, and that would also require a new interchange. And then the bypass would be crossing over Oregon 211, and then based on the traffic volumes there, we determined that would also require an interchange at that connection. And then it also goes over 362nd Drive, just west of 211, but due to the spacing, we determined that that would have to be a grade separated overcrossing, and 362nd wouldn't have direct access onto the bypass. And then looking at the future year 2040 traffic demands and looking at the ODOT design criteria for a highway or an expressway, similar to what the bypass would be functioning as, it was determined that we'd need 120-foot wide right-of-way. There would be 4 vehicle lanes, 2 in each direction. We would have a raised median, We would have a shoulder for pullout and for safety. And there would also be lighting, some street trees and utility easement. And to function the bypass properly, we would also want to make sure that we're managing those future operations. So there would be a raised median, and then we'd have to manage how often or how frequent accesses to other roads could be. And again, this is very high level. This is just the look for this, but we had determined that with the median, we could allow some other roads to have connections, but they would be limited to right in, right out. And then depending on the spacing, some other roads that would be crossed or overcrossed by the bypass, we would have to close the connections and then make sure that we have some local streets to handle connectivity for them, so they could get to other facilities that either get you back into town or could get you to some of the right in, right out connections.
We
on the
have
bypass.
council chambers. Question from the mayor.
Oh, well, now as a clarification, so it sounds like you said it will not connect, the 360 will not be able to connect to it.
Right now, we're thinking, no, it's really too close to the 211 overpass, but it would have an overcrossing, and then it could connect to 211, which would then bring you back to the interchange. So I think kind of in a roundabout way, you could get to it pretty easy with 360, but it wouldn't have direct access to the bypass.
I have a question too.
Sure.
Okay, great. This is Carl. I see a number of things here, and I realize this is still big picture, lots of things to be decided and so on, but it just looks like there was a philosophy that there wouldn't be very many crossings of the new highway bypass. Is that on purpose? And then I noticed that you said everything is going to be right turn onlys, and that's certainly a different strategy than what currently is with Highway 26. Is that a new strategy or?
Well, so the interchanges, on each end in the middle would be full access. But this is, I wouldn't say a different strategy, but for this type of a facility, it is recommended that it has a raised median to preserve the capacity that would be going with this road and making sure that we're getting, the throughput and the traffic flow that we need. Every time you add, a full access intersection, you can significantly degrade the operations. I mean, we'd have to put traffic signals along the facility if it's not an interchange because of the volumes. So we're really trying to focus on this, achieving, the throughput, the traffic flow in the future. So with that concept, it's the raised median, which would then require carefully spaced right in, right out intersections to allow some connection. And then some of those connections would have to be closed just because they would be too frequent. And I don't know if you can see on my screen the X's versus the arrows. And again, this is very high level. This is all to be determined in the future when we start, getting to more refined environmental impact statements and facility plans. This was just a high level look at what we thought could work.
Yeah, I'm just assuming that all your X's and arrows and that kind of stuff will change someplace.
Oh, they could for sure. Like I said, this is just very high level. We wanted to make sure that there were no fatal flaws in this project, moving forward.
Okay. And then the last question I had is, did you, in your analysis, talk at all about 211 and how it would intersect with the 26 and maybe a strategy? I've heard this from several folks in the past, where maybe connecting 211 was an easier try than going from 26 to Shorty's Corner. Is there any conversations about that?
No, we really were focused on the bypass as it is a project in the TSP now and just further refining that and looking at it in more detail. We didn't look at any other alternative connections.
Will you be talking about strategies about how to get it funded in the future?
I have a little bit of that in a couple more slides.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is just the first slide and then. Okay. I'll keep moving.
There's a couple hands up. All right.
Oh, sorry. I have a lot more slides, but go ahead.
Jeff, I can't see any of that.
So I think Commissioner McLean-Wenzel was first.
Okay, Rhea, this is just a question. This may not be the right time to ask it, but I
Sure.
was wondering on something like this, are roundabouts not an option instead of the right in, right out?
Well, roundabouts are tough. I guess we did not look at that, but they are also, I mean, we were expecting this to be about a 45-mile-an-hour facility.
Okay.
And you have to slow down to about 15 miles an hour to get through a roundabout. So I think that might be a little, contradictory to what we're trying to do with
I
the
get it.
bypass, but I'm not saying no. We were really focused on making sure this was, regional traffic and like traffic flow and safety were the most important, and connectivity and other things were not as important.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner Lee.
Yes, did you call on me?
Yeah, go ahead, Jan.
Oh, okay, thank you. This seems like a really good plan with the right turn exits. It reminds me so much of the Bend Parkway. I wondered if it was as similar as I think it is, but I think it, with traffic at 45 miles per hour, it would really serve the feature of being a bypass, not trying to slow it down with other features.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that's on purpose, but I think the Bend Parkway is probably one of the closest existing examples. If you've driven through Bend, how there's a lot of right in, right outs to slip into out of the adjacent neighborhoods, but the facility still flows really well. And then there's, interchanges at specific, more major connections. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
All right, let's continue on.
Anything else? All right, let me keep going. So in conjunction with putting together the alignment that I showed, we also took a look at some transportation operations. And this is consistent with all of the forecasting and growth, demand, and future volumes that we're putting together for the TSP. So they're very consistent. But for the bypass, we are looking at that year 2040. And we are looking at a future peak year that has been adjusted to represent either a summer or a winter peak. And I know you guys know better than anyone that you have a lot of seasonal fluctuation in your traffic volumes demand, especially on the highway. So we looked at 3 different scenarios in the future. The first was that 2040 no build. So that includes all of the existing transportation system. And if there are any projects that we know are fully funded today, that we were very comfortable assuming would be complete in 2040. And I would say like the 362nd and Bell connection is one of those that's under design now. And we know there's funding in place for that. And then we jumped to the next scenario, alternative 1. That's again, year 2040, but that's adding any sort of local connection or intersection capacity projects that have been identified. And again, these are consistent with what's in the 2011 TSP right now. But what that does is allow us to compare that alternative 1 to the no build to see what type of improvements we have in the intersection performance in building everything that we think is reasonable, just short of the bypass. And then alternative 3, again, is that 2040 future peak hour, taking all of those local improvements that are in alternative 1 and just adding the bypass. And then again, that gives us, alternatives to compare where we can see what type of performance improvements are we seeing just from adding the bypass. So does that make sense so far?
It does. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, we wanted to just make sure we had 3 distinct alternatives to the future so we can start seeing, what are the benefits of the local improvements and then what are the benefits if we add the bypass to that. And then this figure right here is from the current TSP. You can see kind of that dashed bypass facility that's on there, and then all of those alternative 1 connections and improvements that were assumed are in there as well. All right. So with that, one of the objectives of this was getting into some more details beyond what was in the current TSP, and that includes looking at several different measures from a benefit and cost perspective. So I'll just walk through these briefly, and if you guys want to jump in and ask questions, please feel free. So the first measure we looked at was the construction cost. So looking out in year 2040 dollars, we estimated that the bypass could cost anywhere from $980 to $1 billion. And that includes construction, getting right-of-way acquisition, the cost of any easements, and then professional services for design and construction management. And that would cover like all of the planning process that goes into getting the bypass approved. So you want me to pause? Any questions on that?
Well, I guess just that's 2040 numbers with.
Yeah, that is a 2040 number, and there's an escalation of, I think, almost 5% per year based on, the past. We have historical cost estimates and we track that as an industry. So that's reflective of that, but a little bit variable, right? It's a little bit of a crystal ball. Okay. And then, sorry, any questions on just cost?
Today's number, that was what, like 240 million, is that correct?
Yeah. Sorry, I don't have it in here, but yeah, it was about 25% of the escalated cost. Yeah.
It almost seemed like we had to just start getting the shovels out today,
Let's go. You couldn't source material.
Sure.
You save almost $1 billion by starting today. So I guess my question still is, Rhea, that was there any look at phasing this thing together? $1 billion is going to be a tough one to hold in the future, but.
Oh, sure. And I have a slide later that kind of talks about like the bigger steps that a major infrastructure project like this would go through, but we haven't got to a level where we're at all chopping up phases or, build this section first. That's a detail that would come later.
Okay, I'll say my question again.
Okay. Well, I mean, later, like in the future.
Just to be clear on the time, the travel time value, like, because I was going through the report on that, I guess I'm still not clear. Who are we saving that money for? It's just a collective for the drivers, for our population? Is it for the city and repair costs? I mean, whose value is that?
So are you down? Wait, so which one are you talking about? Are you talking about the future travel times down below?
Travel time value saves 6 million per year.
Oh, that. Sorry. I didn't know which measure you jumped down to. That's just every user on the facility, whether it's local or a regional person, time is money, as they say. So there is a value in the delays that are saved by building the facility. Freight also comes into that a lot. I mean, there's a lot of expense that comes with freight going through Sandy right now, and sitting in congestion. So there's a bunch of detail that goes into that, but we're just trying to show that there is a benefit of having better travel times and lower delays for people getting through town. Trying to capture that.
Good question. So on that future travel time, I'm kind of confused about those numbers. So under alternative 1, which is just the.
Yep. Do you want me to read through them and try to explain them? Because they confuse me a bit too at first.
We're not doing the bypass, right? Under alternative 1?
Yeah, so what the first one is, and again, I have to remind myself because it is confusing. And we rewrote this like a million times as a group just to make sure that everyone was clear. But so there's alternative 1, which doesn't have the bypass. And then if you add the bypass to it, it saves an additional 4.5 minutes traveling eastbound through town. Does that make sense? And there's no savings westbound.
I'm confused just even by the alternatives. Adding the bypass to other alternative 1 projects, that's alternative.
Okay. Right? Oh, it's this. So alternative 1 is when we add all of these local intersection and like collector connection projects that are on this figure.
When you add the
everything short of the bypass.
That's alternative 3.
And then alternative 3 is all of that plus the bypass.
And you'll go back to your thing.
Yep, sure.
Okay, so adding the bypass to other alternative 1 projects, that's alternative 3, right?
It is alternative 3, yes. We were just trying to be clear that people knew we were adding the bypass.
And so basically doing the bypass would give you 4 minutes and 30 seconds savings for people eastbound.
For people that stay on 26, yeah.
On bypass or going eastbound?
That would be going eastbound on the existing 26 highway.
So you're telling me that there is going east, there's no savings at all, and going west, there's only 4 minutes difference in what is.
No, it's the opposite, but at least that's what our modeling showed. Again, this is peak hour, but it was a 4.5 minute savings eastbound, but we didn't find any savings westbound.
And this includes things like traffic problems. We had a truck almost roll over, but had a big leak here a few years back, and it stopped traffic for hours.
So it doesn't account for like any sort of event or anything. It would just be a year 2040, but I did say adjusted for seasonal fluctuation in winter or summer conditions. It would be that, but it wouldn't be related to like an event day or something where things are not typical.
But Rhea, I guess that where I'm confused is that it fails westbound on 26 every Sunday today. And so I have a hard time just using common sense, understanding that people wouldn't take an alternative route so that they.
Oh, and I'm not saying people aren't taking an alternative route per se, but when we looked at the travel times between the two, I mean, we are finding that people are taking the bypass. If you see the row before, we're seeing that there's about 1,500 cars an hour that would divert over to the bypass. And then 2,300 cars would choose to stay on US 26.
Can you put that in terms of cars per day? Because that's what all of our numbers in the past have been.
Oh, sure. Typically the daily traffic volume is just 10 times the peak. And I think Sandy's pretty close to that. So that would be 15,000 cars a day on the bypass and 23,000 cars a day, approximately, staying on the existing highway.
I first been on council, it was 40,000 cars driving through Sandy a day was what was told to us, and I've been on for a while, so.
I think what would be helpful for me at least is, I'm kind of confused, like, if I'm saving 4 minutes and 30 seconds, am I on the bypass or I'm going through town?
You're going through town on the existing US 26.
It would be helpful to kind of understand, how much time if I'm taking the bypass, do I take it?
And then the second note says, under alternative 3, again, with the bypass in place, the bypass would have shorter travel times compared to US 26. So we saw when comparing the two, there would be a savings of a minute eastbound, and there would be a 2.5 minute savings traveling westbound from end to end. So maybe that's a more meaningful comparison for you guys.
I'm having lots of problems figuring it out here, and I hear conversations throughout the council that are struggling too.
Okay.
If I looked at this numbers, I wouldn't build the bypass for 4 minutes worth of savings and 0 on the other. But I happen to live in town here, and I know it's longer than that.
Sure. Well,
and all the problem issues with weather and oh my goodness. I guess I don't see you taking into account all the variables that happen. It looks like you just ran a computer model and ran it through town and tried to run it.
Well, we actually compared it to travel times that we have taken today. I mean, I travel through Sandy often to get up to the mountain, and we had looked at a lot of data that's available for travel times today and then compared that to our future volume projections to make sure that they were somewhat reasonable. And I do know you do have a lot of peak events and days. The methodology that, and I don't want to get super technical, but the methodology that we follow when we adjust for seasonal fluctuations, following the methods that ODOT requires us to use, is that we look at something called the 30th highest hour. So these do not represent the worst of the worst conditions for Sandy. We don't model those. We try to make something that's reasonable and inflated for a seasonal, but not making any sort of findings or recommendations based on the worst of the worst. And that's typically what we do when we look at all highways in Oregon.
Darren, I think you had something.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I found a table on page 129 of the packet. It was table 4. It broke down the numbers.
Way to go. All 200 pages.
Sorry, and I didn't want to kill you guys with tables and tables and tables.
Just comparing the travel times eastbound and westbound versus all the alternatives, it was super helpful for me.
Thank you.
Okay.
Just out of curiosity, and you may not be able to do this off the top of your head, but I know that the Dundee bypass happened here just a few years ago. Do you have any recollection of how many minutes they saved and they got funded compared to what we've got here?
I do not know that off the top of my head, Steph. I don't know if you have anything to add, but I do know that now that it's opened, the savings have been around a minute to 2 minutes during like the summer peak,
Maybe the
just from like after data.
maybe the question we should be asking is, instead of, as a council, to Rhea, is instead of how many minutes are we gonna save by doing this? What is the norm when you put a bypass in that an area saves? What should, is this normal, or is this
Get perspective.
below or above? Yeah, to get some perspective. Because
Good.
when we just look at these numbers, right? We look at that and go, well, that doesn't seem like a lot. But maybe that's a normal. So I guess, Rhea, can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, sure. That's a really good perspective. And of course, I don't have a perfect answer, because there is no, like, if you say 5 minutes, we'll build it. And if you say 4.5,
And I wouldn't,
right,
I wouldn't
you're
expect-
out, but
Yeah, 'cause that's just
and-
like out there, but.
sure. And bypasses aren't that common these days, but they still do get built. I mean, Dundee is a perfect example. I would say when you start getting up to, like, to me, 3 to 5 minute savings isn't insignificant. And the one thing that's really hard for us to measure, but you guys have hit on a bit, is it's not just the everyday time savings or that 30th highest hour time savings that we've talked about, but when there is an event or when there's weather and other things, you definitely have a transportation system that's more reliable. And it kind of gives you that, a redundant system for the flexibility. But I would think an over 5 minute savings is fairly significant for most bypasses.
I guess the way I kind of look at it and going, yeah, it doesn't sound like a lot, 5 minutes here and there, but it's when you take that to our livability, because we are the ones that live in our community, and the people are using the bypass, they don't live in our community, they live or wanting to go on the other sides of it. And so you're including those trucks and you're all these other things that when we had the big slide up the hill here and none of the trucks could go through Sandy, because of that, the livability and the difference because of trucks, we still had car traffic, was night and day difference. We just, for a month, we're like, wow, this is amazing. Pulling that off, right? It became more walkability. So I think it's the multiple variables, the factors we add into these things that actually bring true value. So time is just one variable in this. And 3 to 4 minutes, maybe that variable, but what it takes off of the other aspects is just, it adds in the safety, the livability, the walkability, those type of things, the community as a whole, that maybe if you want to put it in some value, a number, maybe you say, well, that's worth 8 minutes on top of the 4 minutes or whatever, if you want to kind of compare it to bring something of worth.
Well, and don't forget, we're taking we're diverting 40% of the traffic out of our downtown core. You talk about a walkable community. Rich, I thought you had a pretty good perspective on these just being the normal flow. Is what we're looking at here, not the peak hours and everything else. This is just your average flow through.
So it's not in Sunday night.
Right.
Yeah, I can imagine talking about Tuesday morning at 1 o'clock. It's going to be pretty compared to like a Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock. So find your average. I get that, understand that.
Right, so that time savings may double on a Sunday, it may double on a Friday night or a Saturday morning,
Well, both you and I know exactly when to hop onto 26 out by your house there. There's no cars or you don't go this way, right? Like, which hour of the day, so.
Hollis, looks like you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I was just gonna kind of add on to what Jeremy was just saying. As the former chamber director, if you're diverting 40% of the traffic, it's going to make downtown a lot more usable and walkable and safe. And it's actually, I think, going to be good for our merchants. When I was running the chamber, we used to think that all that traffic was good until we learned how much, very little of it actually stops in town. And I think that's another thing we have to think about is if you're getting those big trucks and some of those off of the downtown, the difference between this bypass and others, I think that's important is that this is our main street as well. I mean, 26 is our main street. So I just wanted to put that out there. Thanks.
Question, how accurate is the 40% figure?
So we actually purchased some data from what the existing travel patterns are for how many cars are going all the way through Sandy and not stopping versus how many cars stop, you know, either on the way in or the way out. And we had that number, and it was actually, I'm sorry, Doc's on the call, he's gonna have to remind me. I think it was
COVID or before COVID?
Oh, before. It was actually historic data that we could buy before COVID. And we actually bumped it up a bit in the future, knowing that, you know, with growth and with more congestion, more people would be attracted to the bypass. So we bumped it up to 40, but I believe today, right now, the through traffic's around 30%. And 70% is either a local trip or it's a through trip that ends up stopping in Sandy.
Wait, I'm sorry. Can we, I guess I didn't quite understand that last part.
Oh, okay. So based on the historic data that we collected, 30% of trips on each end of US 26 are driving all the way through town and don't stop.
Today.
Oh, no, sorry. Am I saying that backwards? I'm saying that backwards. Yeah, 30% of traffic drives, yeah, all the way through and doesn't stop. And 70% is a local trip. We consider it a local trip. It either starts or stops or both. Within our planning area, like within the city limits of Sandy.
Those are your numbers today.
Those are our numbers today, yeah. And we felt that we should bump it up for the bypass with growth and with congestion. We thought the through volume and the attractiveness of the bypass might be a little bit higher. So we bumped it up.
So with the bypass, just to compare it, you're believing we go from 30% of people, those of the 30% people that are just traveling through, that's up to about 40% of people, and most of those are going to be utilizing the bypass. That's our projection.
Yeah, that's what we had estimated. Yeah.
Okay. It's reasonable.
Yeah, one more question. So Rhea, what number are you using? Because that doesn't, the 30%, I remember it being higher than that. What number are you using in terms of how many people drive through Sandy in a day?
You mean today?
Yeah.
The data showed us that it was about 30%, and it was taken over, again, Doc, you're on the call. I want to say it was probably a year of data that was.
No, I mean, the 30% of what? What's the number of vehicles going through Sandy?
Oh, sorry, I don't have the existing ADT in front of me. Sorry, I don't know it off the top of my head.
It was like
20,000.
This is Kelly. It's 30,000. We just looked at it like a couple weeks.
Okay, thank you, Kelly.
Thanks.
Yeah, so 30% of 30,000 is not stopping.
And just, it's hard to kind of conceive of that and I guess that's an average, but, you know, because what we seem to have is on the weekends, you know, everybody's headed to Bend and parts, you know, the mountain camping and skiing, you know, and all. And so that's the average for the whole week.
It's for I believe it was data collected for an entire year. So, I mean, if someone stops for gas, that's not a through trip. Or if someone stops at the grocery store, that's not a through trip. Or if it's a local person using the highway to get around town, that's not a through trip. So yeah, we were a little surprised at it, but then it starts to make sense too. I think a lot of locals use 26 on a daily basis to get around. It is your main arterial and your main street, right, to get around.
Right, but we're also a population of 12,000. We're accommodating metro region as they go and play in Central Oregon every weekend.
I stop in Sandy all the time.
Data.
Yeah, the data just seems hard to believe, but I feel like it should be reversed.
It's called streetlight data, and it comes from when your phone's on and they're collecting data on people. So we have pretty detailed travel data that can let us know how long, you know, people either stay or if they just cut through town.
Thanks.
I guess
So,
I'm
oh, go ahead. I want to make sure you guys get all your questions answered before I keep going.
getting gas or whatever, but they're not getting countered. Yeah, I mean, if there was a bypass, I have a feeling they'd just, the number would be bigger.
Oh, yeah, that's my thinking. And it's just like I think with Hollis is that the numbers are hard to believe.
Well, and where it becomes interesting though, is when you start looking into the future, like on the plan where, let's say the bypass is in, right? And then we've now done a jurisdictional transfer of 26. Well, if it's our folks, it's a lot less, now we got to upkeep that road. There's yeah, there is, but I just mean there's now, it's gonna mainly be concentrated on resident or people who are intentionally traveling through our community to shop, and patron. So I guess I'm just thinking out loud. It starts to make be a lot more reasonable to me of our upkeep of that road at that point. I'm kind of fast forwarding in my thinking.
Well,
but
and then on top of that, I'm assuming we would be able to then, local truck traffic versus through truck traffic once that jurisdiction was moved off, right? So then all those trucks going through to Central Oregon and beyond would have to take the bypass.
Yeah, the bypass could become the new statewide free route.
Okay.
Yeah, and sometimes I also think it's interesting to think about with the bypass in place, all of a sudden, a lot of the congestion issues that are on the existing highway go away, right? Because we're estimating 1,500 vehicles an hour would peel off. So I think I don't know, it's just interesting. Maybe people would stop for gas or dinner where before, they would be like, oh, no way, I want to just get through. We don't have time. We've been in traffic forever. And like you guys had said, you kind of time your local trips on when to take the highway, knowing to avoid the congestion. But if a lot of the congestion goes away, maybe some of the local trips, right, would come back onto the highway. I know it's just kind of interesting to think how, travel options and choices will change with the bypass in place. I don't think it's just 100%, these cars move to another facility. I think it's more complex than that.
Yeah, there's things I can think of in terms of speed going through town. Some of the folks going from Portland to Bend are trying to motate and get through there quickly, and they're traveling 10 miles an hour over the speed limit. Versus if we have just local traffic, they're probably looking for a place to pull over to buy coffee. That so you don't have the speed. That's just one of the things I can think of that would make a difference.
Yep, that speed is definitely a variable. I mean, we have to make a lot of assumptions to put these together. But someone had mentioned, the jurisdictional transfer to the city. That is something that would happen when the bypass is built, but that opens a lot of options for the city. Someone had mentioned, yeah, you guys are going to have to start to pay to maintain that over the next 20 years and beyond. But it also opens up some opportunities for the city. Maybe you don't want all of US 26 to look like it does today, right? I mean, if enough people go to the bypass, maybe it doesn't need to be a 5-lane facility. Maybe at least for segments of it, you want it to look different. And obviously there's a cost to making those types of improvements, but you do gain a lot more control over your main street and what you want it to look like.
Are we ready to move forward on slides, everyone? All right, let's do it.
Sure, okay. And yeah, and we can always, go back if something pops up in your head. So some other considerations for the bypass are regulatory, and there's quite a few. So to move forward, we'd have to show that we can comply with several state policies and regulations that come with the bypass. It does require adoption of a facility plan by the OTC. And then it also requires an amendment to the Oregon Highway Plan to include the bypass. We also have to acknowledge 2 policies that are in the Oregon Highway Plan, which states that existing facilities should be maintained and enhanced to improve performance and safety before adding any network capacity. And that policy categorizes a bypass under the lowest level of priority. The planning process must show other improvements cannot adequately support safety, growth management, or other livability and economic goals. So that's a pretty high test that the bypass would have to go through to show consistency with those policies. And then we'd have to have some cooperation with the city of Sandy and Clackamas County. They would have to work together on amending their TSPs to make sure that they're coordinated in supporting the bypass project. And there would also be some likely impacts to forest use designated land south of town. And the county would need to support adoption of some Goal 5 resource exception findings as well to go with that. So any questions on policies and regulations that go with the bypass?
I guess I have more of a statement. So this plan says 2040, that's as if like we said, go today, right? And it's 2040. And, the chances of that happening are very bleak. And yet we're quickly growing. We already have strains in 2021. And so my only point on that is there's a lot of things, a lot of planning, Goal 5, things with the county. There's a lot of reasons why if this is anywhere in the vicinity of something that we feel as a community 20, 40, 60, 80, 100 years from now that we would want to get done, there are reasons to start moving forward for our ancestors, for people in the future, to make sure that we have put things in place so that they have as much, flexibility at their disposal as possible.
Yeah, maybe that statement add to it is that there's a lot of stuff that's happening now that I don't see us as, conversationally discussing stuff that Jeremy picked up on, things like livability. And I know when I walk between here and my place and here, the smell of diesel is just pretty strong. And I can imagine some of the pedestrian traffic is thinking the same thing when going up and down that portion of 26. It just seems like there's so many things that are really starting to become, in my mind, a health hazard. And I put that into safety as well as environmental, as well as the potential for business and so on downtown Sandy, that I don't see us talking a lot about. This appears to be something that based on what the state would like to analyze this bypass for, and it doesn't really incorporate those local ideas and thoughts.
Well, I think the local stuff fits in the rest of the TSP.
Mhm.
I mean, this is solely for the bypass.
Yeah, I just wanted you guys to be aware of some of the hurdles that come with going forward. That's all.
Okay, all right. I will hold my skepticism, being that there will be some more conversation about that particular.
This was the first argument Carl and I ever had. So.
Yeah. It may not be the last, but we'll see.
No, I'll have to reiterate what Stan said there, because it's been in my mind too. It's like, we've got to start somewhere, and do we start now or do we start later? And I know we're not done with the slide deck at all, but when I start looking at the dates you guys have on here, how long it takes, and some of us have been around a while, we know everything is slow moving, especially when we work with the state. I'll be 90 years old before this, just doing the math here. I mean, that's not an exaggerated number. So, this is really going for our grandkids or even great grandkids in a lot of ways. And I'm tired of kicking the can down the road. So I'm excited to see it, moving forward with it. So yeah, this isn't going to be something we see tomorrow.
Okay, I'm going to hop to the next slide so we can keep, it's kind of related. Just look at that schedule and funding.
Question, I mean, just short answer for this, but I have to go back from Clackamas Town and all that, and the whole Sunset Highway thing, talk about slowdowns. Is that, are we competing against that project, or is that in the offing anywhere? Or can you just kind of give us a short answer on that?
Sure. Yeah, the Sunrise Phase 2 is not a reasonably funded project. And yeah, this would be competing with something like that. I mean, they're a lot further along in their planning process. They already have an environmental impact statement that's in place, though they're replacing it with some new concepts that the county is working on right now. But yeah, I would say that this bypass would be competing with all of the statewide projects that are in this kind of early planning phase as you move the next 10, 20 years for funding.
Yeah, the only reason I shake my head no just a little bit is to your point that they're so far ahead in their planning that they're a lot more shovel ready than we are, right? So they're
Oh,
gonna
sure, but
bite the apple before we're even to the point of bellying up to the table.
yeah, and I want to say their environmental impact statement is going on 10 years old. I can't remember, maybe 2013 adoption, but I mean, just to show you how long things take, they've been working on that project for probably 10 or 15 years from a concept. I think it's been in the county's plan as a dashed line for a really long time, and they're still nowhere near, right, even getting funding for the second phase, let alone construction. They could be 10, 20 years out on their end. So just shows how long this type of projects can take.
Kind of raise a question I was going to ask later on, and that is when we start getting into these environmental studies and stuff, like how long do they last? You know, it's we're trying to figure out the timing as to when to do a study, to completion, to financial ask. I mean, how do we bet? Maybe you have a slide for this. I apologize, but
No, this is the last slide, so go for it.
Okay, so how do we do that? You know, like, how do we decide when to go into one study, but not want to do it because it'll probably be, you know, it'll be old by the time we actually get to use it, you know?
Yeah, I have to say my expertise is not everything that goes into building a giant infrastructure project. I'm just the engineer that you hire for the transportation piece of the EIS, I must admit. And I don't know if Seth has more to add, but I think there's some somewhat logical steps that you go through. I mean, this is still really, really early. I think starting to work on some of that regulatory stuff probably comes first, and meetings with DLCD. I mean, as far as I know, I don't know if anyone from Sandy sat down with the right people at the state and DLCD and the county, and even just started having those early conversations with them as far as, you know, what it would take and what kind of support you guys would be getting. So I would guess all that relationship and talking comes first.
Okay.
And then just funding for any sort of environmental impact statement after you have that regional support, I think would then be the next step.
This is Kelly. DLCD does know we're looking at this as a potential project, and they've even, I think, attended at least one of the citizen advisory committee meetings. Unfortunately, our DLCD rep passed away unexpectedly over the summer. So, and there's been very short staff down there. But yeah, I do agree with Rhea that getting DLCD in our corner is going to be very important for this entire process over the next 20 plus years.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, to be blunt, I think you guys really need to sell, you know, why this is needed, why it's a priority, how it meets, you know, statewide goals and local goals, and kind of get into all the touchy-feely part as well, just to show why it's so important and why, you know, this would go before any of the other priorities that are statewide. Here, and this, let me get through this slide just really quick. So yeah, there's just this is just a little diagram that shows kind of the hoops that you can jump through to get through planning, coming up with the concept, all that engineering and planning piece. Right away acquisition can take a really long time. That's a whole process on its own. And then getting the shovels out, as you guys said, and starting the construction. That in itself could be numerous years. And I did a little digging too into how different types of major infrastructure projects and bypasses get funded. And I did dig into the Dundee bypass a bit, and maybe there's no surprises, but these types of projects have a wide variety of sources and phases. The Dundee has like 2 or 3 different funding sources just for all these tiny little phases. Like just right away, it could be 3 different funding sources of state and federal and some local money. And then you move on to, you know, phase 2B of, you know, engineering design, and it has a couple sources. And then moving on to construction, there were like 3 or 4 different pots of money that they were able to pull together. A lot of it couldn't be done without legislative support, and you're going to need them to be looking your way and offering money to help fill in any gaps that come from the other sources. So it seemed like it was a lot of creativity and being open to finding funding to get it moving. So any other questions? Yeah, this is my last slide on the bypass.
Yeah, one question you talked about phasing, and I think one Carl was bringing up, or one
Mhm.
that I had thought of many times is, in this whole bypass, trying to eat the elephant in one big chunk. Don't do any of it unless we do all of it, I think is not realistic, but the idea there from 211 to Furwood being something that could go, have a feasibility of that. What's when putting this all onto our TSP and then getting with the county, you get the whole thing, and then starting into the phases, how realistic is it to be able to get some of that funding without doing the entire environmental study from end to end, or just that chunk of that to kind of get rolling on some of these things?
I would think your environmental impact statement would want to look at all of the different alternatives. They typically do. I mean, I worked on some that had like 20 network alternatives. So you'd want to make sure you look at all the feasible phasing of the project that are possible through that. And then if that does find that there is a feasible phase 1 or phase 2, and I really don't know, because you'd have to get into very detail looking at, well, can the intersections take those type of, heavy turn movements if we only build one section of the bypass, and what are the benefits of that? I mean, I can already think of 4 or 5 different alternatives right now that you'd want to look at. But if you had your environmental impact statement with all of those alternatives laid out, I think that would get you in a good position where then you could start saying, oh, well, maybe we build this piece and it's only 30% of the total cost. Or maybe it's even a 2-lane facility with right of way for 4. I mean, it's something we could at least look at. We thought the 2040 volumes would warrant just building the whole thing. But again, this is a pretty high level. Maybe there's even like a smaller cross section that could be built to save money at first.
So what are the next recommended steps then, if we decide that we want to move forward in some fashion? Now there's different, there's toes in the water, foot in the water, jumping into the deep end of the pool kind of stuff. But, obviously there's some legwork, it sounds like, with some regional partners and stuff that we need to sit down and talk to. There's facilities plans, environmental studies, and everything else. So the first I would say is regional partners, but then what's after that?
Well, one of the decisions before the council, all the big policy decisions, you keep it in your TSP, right?
Yeah.
The local plan, and then building that regional support. Rhea, I was going to ask, in your experience, these 2 next steps, study wise, right, to get it closer to shovel ready and all that stuff. You got the facilities plan or preliminary design type of effort, but the environmental impact statement, what are we talking, like $500,000 for the EIS for a project like this?
Well, great question. Let me think. I mean, there's a ton of different disciplines that have to go into that, because you actually will have like a natural resources consultant and an environmental, a scientist consultant and the civil. I mean, it's shocking how deep that document can get. And I usually only work on like I said, the transportation piece, but I think it could easily be $1 million study for something like this if it was done the next couple of years.
By the time we apply
funding support for that. too.
Yeah. So we gotta get support for that. And so the decisions that, council and planning would have is obviously sitting down with PacWest or government relations firm, prioritizing a legislative ask, figuring out grants with staff. And so we'd have to figure out funding. But hell, even funding those 3 or 4, under the plan I just laid out, that's a 3-year, 4-year process in its own. Then you get the funding, then you do the plan. Hell, we're 5-6 years out if we started today.
After if we were to get it on our own TSP and then get it on the counties as well.
Which is all fine. We've said from the get out, this is going to be a long project, but those are the steps. Yeah.
One other thing I guess I would add to the things to consider is that some of our business people are not really bought into this.
That's right too.
One of the things that I have always kind of, whenever I get in that conversation downtown, is think about what happens if it's I was told 40,000 cars, but let's go with the 30,000. What happens in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the road when it goes from 30,000 to 50,000 to 80,000 cars a day? Someplace down the road, there will be a place where we just will not accept it. And people will just go crazy. Too many rats in the box kind of thing. But the other piece I just came across to me today is 70%. I'm not sure I believe that, but let's say at least a large portion of those cars will still continue to go through town. And those are the ones that are buying gas, buying groceries, all that kind of stuff. It's just not a desert, that will happen once the bypass occurs. So there's some things that we need to do to buy the business people into it. I think most of our residences I would say, just as a guess, are probably in favor of the bypass. I hear screeches of tires all the time when some mother's trying to walk across Proctor in my office there. It just scares me. And I know those mothers with the little stroller out front and the 5-year-old kid in the hand are just thinking the same thing. We got to get rid of the large number, but I don't know that all of our citizens are bought into it yet. So that might be something.
And I guess what I'm trying to push back on, Carl, is I'm trying to create an environment that 20, 30 years from now, when that happens, right? When it hits that boiling point, and then there's a new mayor and council elected, they sit down here and they do their feasibility study and they say, okay, you can have that by the year 3060. I'm trying to create a faster path, you know what I mean, for that to be able to happen.
Just saying though that I don't think people have completely bought into, or at least understand, maybe put it that way, that this will continue to happen. Maybe 30,000 cars a day is marginally acceptable for all the reasons we've talked about, but when it's 70,000 cars, and I suspect it will be that sometime down the road, it will be unacceptable.
Totally. And then how long are you willing to wait till you can fix it?
Hey, I won't even tell you how old I am at this point.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well,
Jeremy's going to be 90. I will tell
Well,
you
I
that.
look at this as it's 40 years out.
Right.
This is how I read it.
Yeah.
And as far as business, you say 20.
But 20 is very optimistic.
That's very optimistic.
Right.
Look at the
but-
sun.
But we're looking at 2040 data, so
Right.
I'm just saying that's.
But the point being is we will have grown as a community as well, helping those businesses and local businesses be more local. And then as well as when we look at that, you have 20 to 40, I'm going with, as to be able to also adjust as well. So, and, most of us will have already be old enough, we won't care. But in that same fashion, I know they bring out gas stations as one of them. But in 20 to 40 years, we may not need or have as many the gas station numbers we have today. So that's just one example of how we grow as a economic venue as well too. So.
Well, and the other piece is, we're being somewhat myopic in only looking at our growth and how our growth is affected by this, but you have to look at the growth of the state and the Portland metro area and the Vancouver metro area.
Central Oregon.
Right.
And then that was going to be my last statement. And so, this entire area is going to grow over the next 20 to 40 years and beyond that, right? There's no stopping that. And so, our numbers will be one thing, but the area's numbers will be significantly larger. And we're still, a one-stop shop going east or to the mountains. So that isn't going to change.
All right. We ready to go off of the bypass, or do you feel like do you need?
Yeah, well, I was just going to recap a tad bit, and someone already mentioned it, but yeah, the decision really for tonight is, do we keep, well, maybe not for tonight, but for the TSP process, is does the bypass stay as a project that's unfunded in the TSP? Or do we feel, I'd be shocked if you said this, that we aren't interested in it at all and we just want to take it out of the TSP?
And I want to ask this for Councillor Hokinson, who's not here, but sent Rich and I an email earlier. And that is do we worry that, is it a reasonable worry? And maybe this is for somebody else, maybe this is for like a Seth on here, that by having such a large project like a bypass incorporated into our TSP that would take so much money, that it would distract from other smaller priorities that could be more short-term solutions to moving traffic through town?
Well, what I can say our process is we're going to end up with 2 project lists. One is going to be projects that are high priority that we think are reasonably able to be funded in the year 2040. And then everything else is just considered aspirational. It's supported, but it didn't make the top list of priorities that we could fund. If you get like development money to pay for those aspirational projects, or if you can write a grant and win and get them, that's great. I think it's important to keep everything that you want in your TSP. But it shouldn't be a distraction, because we'll be very focused on that financially constrained or reasonably funded high priority project list. So I think it's good to park it there and keep it, and it won't distract from the other table.
Yeah. Hi, this is Seth. And the only thing I'd add, I agree with Ria. I think the only sense it could distract is, we just talked about the large level of effort it will be for the city to move it forward. So you do have to consider, do you want to put all your capital in that basket, or on some other things that are still expensive, but maybe more attainable in the near future?
That's right. Thank you.
I guess I'm assuming this is an ODOT project and not a City of Sandy project. I guess I'm not expecting City of Sandy to be paying for this.
Well, that is interesting, right? Because it is a state highway. I mean, it is it's obviously a priority of ours. That's why we brought it forward. I guess the best answer to that would be continued like collaboration on projects, or what is an answer to that?
Yeah, I don't think we'll get into this later in the TSP. I don't think the city would have the funds to do it. So it would have to be an ODOT project at some point in partnership with the city and county. So from that standpoint, I think, related to the earlier conversation, telling the story about how it's a benefit to the entire state will be important to move it forward.
Local champion. We are the local champion for the project.
Yeah.
And I think that's how I see our role as we go and apply for grants and said, be that champion, telling the story across the state, why it's important that the state to fund our project in our community. Not necessarily ours and Sandy, but our community over others.
Well, I'll just say, I was the legislative director for Bruce Starr when he was co-chair of the Transportation Committee in the Senate back during the Newburgh-Dundee bypass. And I got to know Gary George and Larry George and Mary Starrett, and the county commissioners and all them very well, because they're always in the office, pushing forward on that project. So to your point, it's local champion, keeping it top of mind, pushing for it, but would be an ODOT managed project.
I guess I would be curious for just having a little white paper or something, using that Dundee one as an example, and what role did the city of Dundee play compared to the county commissioners and the state, and all that would be just helpful to kind of know what our role would be. Obviously we're cheerleaders for it, but I guess financially is what I'm more interested in.
Well, I'm just thinking strategy that we've had in the last few years about several of our projects that have been funded out of the state. And it's just, I'm really impressed. We've gone from back in the days when I started with the council, almost no recognition that Sandy existed, with almost very little support from the state, to millions of dollars showing up, almost tens of millions of dollars actually showing up here at the table. And to me, that makes a major difference, to be able to know that there is a way to leverage those legislators. We've got a new bevy of them coming up, and once the districts gets approved and changes made in that area. But I think it's important to be on that spot. My guess is that there were more than just county and city people on the Dundee exchange hanging on the doors. So we need to talk to those people too.
I also want to make sure, and I know that we're going to be talking more about the TSP, but that, for us as a council and planning commission, moving forward, that we don't put all of our eggs in this basket, and that we continue to look for ways to alleviate some of these issues on our own going through town, and be proactive in those as well. So,
but I still want to move intentionally, though. You know what I mean? Understanding it's super long term and all that, but still, like, where we're taking these steps, building a regional relationship.
That there's a plan. Yeah, for sure.
Mayor, Kelly O'Neill's had.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, Kelly, please pipe in.
I just had two quick things. One thing was the 30,000 car number. Just Carl, I know your skepticism. I'm skeptical too because I live here as well. But just remember that's an average day. So that's not like the Sunday after Thanksgiving or the weekend after the 4th of July. So that number probably balloons much higher than that on those special circumstances. So just kind of remember that. And the only other thing I was going to say is that I think it would be helpful, and no decisions obviously tonight, but for staff to know how budgetarily we would start going down a path as far as the bypass though, because I think, I understand your guys' concerns about being like a split in funding and a lot of it coming from the state or feds. But to even do things like the white paper request from Kathleen, which I think was fantastic idea. We still need a funding source for that. And so I don't know who would be paying who. I don't know if DKS would be drawing that up for us and how that would be paid for. But there are going to be, if we want to start taking some steps towards this eventual goal, there's going to be costs associated with those. So just trying to get an idea on that.
Thank you. All right, Rhea, do you have some more wrapping up to do or?
No, if you guys are happy, I'm happy. That was a very good discussion.
I think we're happy. Thank you so much for the presentation.
Sure. All right, so the next thing I wanted to jump in is we had a community survey over the last month or so, and I wanted to dig in that a little bit. This is just an overview of the public involvement that we're doing for the transportation system plan update. So if you don't know, there is a Sandy Speaks website that, like I said, started about a month or so ago that we'll be using. We also are doing the public surveys for that. Oh, sorry, what?
You have the graphic when you're done with your presentation. The Sandy Speaks one. It's awesome.
Oh, I just clipped it from the website.
I didn't know we had that. That's cool. All right.
Oh my God. I didn't create that. That's a cut and paste from your wonderful website that Shelley put together.
That was Shelley, yeah.
That looks good.
Yeah. So we have a community advisory committee that we're working with. We will have a public open house next year. And then as I had mentioned, we'll also have public hearings. So with that, I believe we asked 9 questions on the online survey and we had over 400 responses, which I think is amazing. This might be one of the few good things that came out of our pandemic is it's really pushed us to have online public involvement. I would say in the past, if we did it the old fashioned way and we had an in-person open house, and I had maps out and asking questions, I think we'd be lucky if 40 people came. I've been to open houses where 0 people came. So getting over 400 responses and having this type of input, I think is great. So we asked some questions up front. Questions 1 through 4 was how easy is it to walk, bike, ride transit, or drive in Sandy, with 0 being not easy and 10 being extremely easy. So you can see people, actually, they think getting around by vehicle is the easiest way to get around. And transit's behind it a bit, and then almost a tie, I think, between walking and biking. Which maybe no surprise, I think predominantly people do drive in Sandy to make their daily trips. And then our next question was, what type of issue is most important to address in the TSP? The highest response was congestion. And then behind it, not too far behind it, was safety. And then quite a bit below those was livability, funding, and then connectivity. So you guys probably are not surprised to see that congestion and safety are the top 2 issues. Yeah, go ahead.
You go back to your previous slide where
Sure.
everything, even walking, was relatively easy. And then you go to the next slide and safety becomes the #1 critical problem. It seems hard for me to put the 2 together.
Well, you're right. I mean, the questions are somewhat related, but not exactly correlated, right? I mean, I think we're just asking people, what 5 means, it's moderately easy. But just because it's easy to walk down a sidewalk doesn't mean it feels safe to you, right? I'm not sure easy and safety are exactly the same thing, and somewhat a little bit hard to maybe understand how they are interpreting the question. But safety could be driving safety as well, right? The safety answer is somewhat, you don't know what mode they might be thinking of if they pick safety. I don't know if that helps. It's somewhat hard to interpret the feedback that we get.
How you interpret the question. So, yeah, got it.
And then what mode of travel are most important to address? So driving, another clear winner here. And then walking. And then number 3 is transit. And then after that is biking. And then after that is freight. And I see that as lining up pretty well with the type of trips that people are making. I mean, driving is the most common way to get around town, but I think walking's easily a number 2, and then transit and biking as well. I don't know if you guys think that kind of aligns with, but just the popularity of the modes in town. But it seemed reasonable to me. Yeah. All right. So question 7, what transportation challenges have you experienced in Sandy? So if you haven't seen this graphic before, it's called a word cloud. So it takes all of the answers and the responses, and then it displays them. And then the larger the font that is used for the word, that's represents how frequent that response was given in the answer. So look, you can see, kind of back up, the biggest words: congestion, traffic. Those ones stand out pretty big. And then again, they're just words in a response. So sidewalk, weekend, I might go with congestion.
Are they, do they correlate with color at all?
No, that's just so you can read it better. It's just the font size.
School, congestion, and light all actually make a lot of sense to me.
So you can start to make sentences out of it for fun. Yeah.
Well, some
downtown, highway, yeah, you can see a lot of stuff jumps out.
Yeah.
just abbreviated. So if you were to join those 2 together, maybe that word would be bigger. Or are they saying highway because of traffic and congestion?
Yeah. Looks like we have a hand up from Hollis and then from Chris Main.
Okay, thank you. I was just going to say, I did the online survey, and when I did it, the thing is that, like with bikes, we know that if there's safer biking available, if there's bike lanes, people will use their bikes more. I mean, that's happened everywhere. And I know that when that whole thing happened in Portland, where they added bike lanes, the use of bikes went up tremendously. And so I just think it's important to know that some of these modes of transportation, it's like, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Do you provide better transit and then people take it? Do you provide bike connectivity on bike paths for people to ride their bikes more? So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, no, and that's a great comment. The other example I would add is, a lot of times people go, well, no one crosses the street here, so why would we put in a crossing improvement? Like, well, maybe because they feel like they're gonna get ran over. And a lot of times we find if we put an enhanced pedestrian crossing, especially in the right location with the right land uses on each side, you'll start to get a lot of people crossing. So I think it's the same thing. We shouldn't assume the current demand, right, is the ultimate demand for the need for something like that. Thanks. Someone else had a comment or question?
Yeah, this is Chris Mayton. I just wanted to take us back on this slide. It gives good representation of the conversation we had previously, where you can see congestion and traffic are the 2 largest words used, and time is relatively small. So that 4.5 minutes doesn't matter much as moving the 40% of the cars off of 26, at least from these 400 survey responders.
Well, that's a good observation. I didn't even see the word time in there. It's so small. Right, any other questions on this one?
We're good.
Keep moving. So this is the same thing, but different question. What do you value most in the existing transportation system? So I must admit, you can see the largest word on here is nothing. I wasn't sure how to interpret that, and I was somewhat surprised. I don't know if that just means there's nothing to value, or I don't know. It's a tie and they just don't value anything the most. But the other responses were transit, bus, SAM. These are all the same thing. Downtown, walk, trolley, free. Not sure what free means. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts you want to add about this one.
Well, when I took the survey, I took it as well. I was thinking that there was a lot of need for improvement in a lot of things. And so I don't think I used nothing, but I can imagine someone putting nothing on there as it could be interpreted a couple different ways. So maybe the question wasn't as well designed as it could have been. And just as a comment, your graph, I was struggling to find some of the words. I looked up and I could see some, like city on the very bottom of this one is almost impossible to see unless you look at it just right. So,
Okay.
You're looking for just the big words like nothing and transit and bus. They really scream at me, Sam.
All right, let's move forward.
Well, I think that's, oh no, there's one more, sorry. We asked, how would you rank each approach to prioritizing the transportation project? So the most common one was adding vehicle capacity by widening, constructing major improvements to existing roads, or extending existing roadways to create parallel routes on congested corridors, or two. And then the second most popular response was improving existing facilities with minor improvements such as upgrading road standards, filling in system gaps, and safety improvements. And then the third most was add cost-effective improvements such as better traffic signal operations, encouraging walking, biking, and transit, and applying new policies and standards. And then fourth at the end was adding vehicle capacity to the system by constructing new facilities. So, anyone guys have any comments?
I have some.
Those?
Number 4 ends up being a factor when, some new development goes in and all of a sudden, they're trying to squeeze a bunch of more traffic onto some local street. So, I think when you have that situation, that gets rated higher. But the other thing I want to kind of ask about is on the, it was the other presentation that got sent out to us. It's the other presentation slide, and it was the second slide on that. It was called, well, it says report title that is very long and descriptive. Was that the resolution or something? TSP, yeah, TM7.
Oh.
I don't know why.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, your TM7 TSP solutions, page 2.
Oh, the memo, sure.
Page 2 of the memo, because it says approach to developing network improvement. Sandy's proposed approach to developing transportation project is based on 4 tiers of priorities. And under the highest priority, you've got cost-effective improvements, the ranking are tougher than what the community said.
So that is just a draft. We have not updated that to reflect the survey, I would say.
Well,
that's kind of the typical approach that we start with, but we wanted to put it in as a community survey question to get some feedback from the public. But I do think part of the discussions with staff and with everybody on this call is if you agree, or should we be taking a different approach to prioritizing projects? So that's something that I guess we need to determine.
I'm with the community priorities because, making, and I'm a trails planner, bike trails and walking and, building trails here in Sandy. So I'm all about trails and pedestrian access and all that. And I think that's important. But given all the other issues with our transportation system, I don't think that's the number 1 priority is dealing with the walking, biking, and transit that, under this memo 7, when I read that, I decided I was going to say something about that because I don't agree with those. I do agree with the community survey. So that's
okay. No, yeah, thank you. Yeah, that definitely is a draft and something that we will be updating as we get more feedback from everybody. And does anybody have thoughts, like agree or disagree?
As we give feedback, I'm with the community too. I mean, I was looking at those with Kathleen earlier as well. I think the community's priorities are a lot more straightforward and where we really are at than I think is reflected in that memo.
Okay. Anyone else?
Did you not do the survey?
I would just also add the traffic signal operations almost seems like it's the number one thing, the vehicle capacity and all that. Fixing those traffic signal timing is such an important and fairly, I don't want to say it's cheap, but it's really important to dealing with some of the traffic issues we have on 26 through town. And it kind of gets a little bit lost when you lump it in with the walking, biking, and transit stuff.
Yeah, and I think the intent of that approach is doing just all the cost-effective, low-hanging fruit type of things. I think that's what's trying to get at, because you get a lot of bang for your buck, I guess is what number 3 is trying to get at. The other things are a lot more expensive. Any other comments or input? I'm doing a time check.
Commissioner McLean wants to answer.
Oh, yeah, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't know if Seth is the right person to ask. I know he's the grant manager, but he's also from ODOT. I guess one of the things that was exciting to me about, the bypass would be that Sandy would actually have jurisdiction over 26 as it goes through town. At least that was my understanding, which meant that we could have control over the signal timing. I've been told, and maybe this isn't true, but that we can't change the timing on the signals because it's under ODOT, and ODOT is the one who sets the signals, and that their goal is to get traffic through town. And as citizens, our goal, and business owners, our goal is to slow, traffic down so it's safe enough to be downtown and do business. So I guess that's my question is, can we, without the bypass, actually have any influence over signal changes? Because it seems like it should be easy, but then I've been told it's not.
In general, ODOT's perspective is to, focus on throughput on the highway facility. That being said, I believe the technology and the signals through Sandy has recently been updated. So it's a more modern system and should work a little bit better to adjust to different situations. But yes, I hear you. I understand that can be frustrating sometimes, and we'll continue to work with you to try to balance it as well as we can.
Thank you.
All right, anything else? I believe this is my last slide on the survey.
Let's move forward.
No, right, keep moving. All right, so this is our last topic. Jumping into the TSP and the Tech Memo 7 that was sent out for you guys. And again, yeah, I did want to be clear, that's just an early draft. I wanted to make sure you guys at least had the details that we're going to go with these slides if you wanted to dig into those. So this is presenting those future needs and proposed solutions. So just a bit of an update to how we're getting to the solutions that we're going to show tonight. We have an evaluation process that we apply. It starts at the beginning where we do an inventory of existing and future system needs, and we identify if there's any gaps or deficiencies in its motor vehicle, walking, biking, and transit that we focus on. And then we started with a review of the current TSP projects. We went through and we removed any projects that have been completed. And then we needed to either confirm, revise, or add any new projects based on those new inventory that we took a look at, or the future system. And remember, we're looking now out to 2040, so things could look a little bit different than they did in the past TSP. And then we went through and applied evaluation criteria to those draft projects for all of those modes. And that kind of helped us set an early, high, medium, or low prioritization for those. And the evaluation criteria come right from the goals, which I believe is my next slide. Yeah. So just for a reminder, earlier in the process, we worked with the Citizen Advisory Committee to take a look at the current TSP goals and refine them as needed or add to them as needed. So these are the 9 goals that we have right now for the transportation system. And just briefly, a system that prioritizes mobility and connectivity for all users. It promotes a cost-effective investments for the system. It supports specific community needs. We want to promote traffic management so we're efficient with our infrastructure. We want to minimize environmental impacts on natural resources and encourage efficient alternatives. We want to provide safe, efficient, and high quality transit service, promote a safe system for all users. We want to support equity and make sure that we have transportation choices for all users. And we want to support options for exercise and health. And then with those, we come up with some more detailed evaluation criteria that we can apply to all the projects to see which projects are achieving or moving the needle on these goals the most. And those are typically the early prioritized high priority projects, and then the rest fall out to be a medium or low. So any questions on that so far? No? Okay, silence is good. I'll keep going. So looking out at that year 2040, and again, it's a peak hour that has been seasonally adjusted to be some peak conditions that happen in the summer and the winter, but not the worst of the worst of the worst day. That's what we're focused on. So you can see in the year 2040, we have quite a few intersections that exceed mobility targets. On US 26, that includes Orient Drive, 362nd. It's Industrial Way, Reuben, and Bluff. And then also the 362nd Drive intersections at both Industrial Way North and South. And then also 211 at Hornsted Road. So we're, oh, go ahead.
What do you have to be a mobility target? So we're talking like intersections, whether they're lighted or not lighted, like what?
So we focused on all of the traffic signal controlled intersection on 26. And then we also looked at quite a few local intersections. And I know it's small, but if you look at that, the figure that's right here, if you see a stop sign or a traffic signal symbol, those are the intersections that we evaluated. Sorry, I didn't clarify that. So all those on that figure are what we looked at. And of all of those, these are the ones that would have capacity or mobility issues in 2040 based on the current targets. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
okay.
The mobility targets, I get that most of that's intersections. Does that also deal with ADT, roads that are way over their ADT?
Nope, this is all focused on intersection operations. At least from a mobility target. Agencies don't have a target for how, like what an ADT or a peak hour volume on like a length of a road could be. We focus on the operations at the intersection, and they're typically where all of the delay occurs.
What do you
go ahead.
At the end, lack of arterial and collector connections?
Well, yeah, that was my next one. So we also know that that Sandy doesn't have the collector or arterial street system that they would like to have. So we can have that nice grid so people don't have to rely on the highway to get around. So we also were looking at some connections as well, beyond just improvements to the intersections. I just wanted to make sure I captured both.
So to address that on your bypass evaluation, you have a bunch of different projects listed there.
Mm-hmm.
Arterials and collectors, is that for alternative one? Is that to address this issue for need?
Yep. Yeah, so those are the projects that are in the current TSP, and we started with all of those to either keep them or to decide that we don't need them anymore, or if we need to add more to them. But yeah, those were the projects that we started with. Right, any other questions? All right, I will keep going. So I'm just focused on the street network. This figure shows the figure shows all the projects, the high, mediums, and the low. But for space on my slide, I just grabbed the high priority projects. And again, these are all early prioritizations that are up for discussion. I assume they will likely move around. Some mediums could jump to high, some highs could jump down. But I wanted to start getting some feedback from this group on these. So the high priority driving projects are mostly street extensions. And some of them are in design right now, like extending Bell to 362nd. And it's 2 different segments of that. It's currently in design and funded. So that's definitely a high priority project. It is in the current TSP. And then we also have extending to the Barco out to US 26, and it would intersect opposite of Vista Loop on the west end. And again, these are all in the current TSP. We're not promoting or recommending any changes to these. There's also the extension. It's a very small extension of Village Loop Boulevard to out to a collector. Right near Cascadia Village Drive. I don't know if you can see it. That's project 21F, kind of in the southern portion of town. One second. Oh.
Yeah, this is Kelly. It's on the west side of Bornstead Park, connecting where Snowberry subdivision is currently down to the south end of Bornstead Park, where Mountain View, Ridge, Zion Meadows, and Marshall Ridge are now located.
Yeah, it's just a little segment, isn't it, Kelly?
It's a little segment, but it's very important so that all of those new households don't go out to Bornstead Road.
Okay, and then we also had, what is that, D24? It is at Oregon 211. And providing a turn lane right there to Gunderson. I believe that's in the current TSP. And then we also had an intersection improvement, US 26 at 362nd, where we'd be adding some turn lanes there. And those really go with the 362nd extension to the north. When we add the north leg to that traffic signal, there'll have to be some capacity improvements that are added at that intersection.
Jordan, what are we talking about with the Alt Avenue?
Well, it's project ID D24, Oregon 211, turn lane to Gunderson. I get that.
Yeah,
But then the description says reconstruct Alt Avenue.
No.
So
that is a good.
The description's incorrect.
The description is incorrect. Sorry. I grabbed it right from the memo.
They were not.
Well, it should. Oh, sorry. He found a mistake in my presentation.
Cause issues.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure.
Put that on the record.
Yeah, is that on the record? We're not doing anything there.
Thank you.
Well, wait, which one don't you like? The name or the description?
I love Kelly's giggle there. That was fun.
So yeah, the description is a project that we've looked at in the past, and that would be more of a pedestrian improvement, not.
Yeah, I would guess so too. Yeah, I was just making a joke, but yeah, sorry. I don't know why that description's in there.
That is controversial.
Oh, sorry, and I don't mean to make a mistake on something that's controversial.
It's okay. We'll get over it.
Okay, so these are what we have right now for the high priority driving projects. And I'll get through all these and then I think we'll have a big discussion at the end and I can always go back. So looking at historic collision data, we found that there is a couple of safety deficiencies that popped up. US 26 had some issues at all the traffic signals on the west end, 362nd, Reuben, and Orient Drive. We found that there's quite a few rear end collisions and turning collisions. And typically that's caused by the high traffic volumes that we see during the congested conditions and just urban traffic driving. And then we also saw that there are quite a few collisions at Oregon 211 at DeBarco. Those were turning collisions by drivers not yielding. So for the second one, I think the fix is pretty easy. The current TSP has a project to install a traffic signal at 211 DeMarco. And that should really help with the turning collision and the driver not yielding issue that we're having for safety. And then the other one with the rear ends and some of the turn crashes along that western section of US 26, we were going to recommend installing it's an adaptive signal control system on US 26. And I think Seth had mentioned that recently an adaptive system was added to all the traffic signals through downtown. And it is a more modern signal controller that can actually count cars and understand the conditions as they're happening and can make little adjustments to the signal timing as needed. So it's not the old-fashioned way where, you know, somebody went out and just said, well, this time of day, you know, this approach gets this many seconds of green time and based on conditions, and that's just how it's going to be. These signals controllers are actually smart and can make some decisions based on the condition. So if there's an event and things are backing up, maybe they would give more, you know, green time to the side street or the throughput to, you know, mitigate the delays as much as possible. But that's only in the downtown area. So we think based on a lot of these safety issues that we're seeing on the highway, that extending that adaptive signal all the way to the west out to Orient would be a pretty big safety benefit on the system. All right. Oh,
An additional,
oh. Go ahead.
an additional light,
An additional traffic signal?
right? So would that be additional?
Oh, no, all it does is it takes all of the traffic, the same traffic signals. It just changes all the technology and the controllers that go with those traffic signals, and it connects all of them. And then it allows them to have a more modern system.
It would be,
Make better signal timing.
would be a new traffic signal at 211 in DeMarco though.
Oh, yeah, sorry. But that's not part of that. Sorry, I thought you were asking me about the signal system. Yes, there would be a new traffic signal at 211. Sorry.
I feel like that'd come up in the past, but there were some visibility issues and stuff that was brought.
Well, there's money actually.
Is any of
put
that ringing true?
Well, there's money set aside years ago. The Planning Commission would remember this back when Barlow Ridge was developed. They had to put money towards that, and so that's sitting in a kitty for this. But yeah, and then ODOT realigned it to help it lay it out. But it wasn't warranted. It hasn't been warranted in the past, but there's been many fatalities.
Has
you know,
been. Wow.
people we know already, and family members. Sections.
Yeah, as an alternative, do you guys look at roundabouts? I know the speed there's again at 45. but-
That was the issue. Thank you, George. Yes.
Because of light.
Oh, because of speeds.
But if you could slow it down and a roundabout would.
I don't think it's only speeds, but we've talked about this internally and actually with a few traffic engineers as well. And I don't know if we've talked to DCAS about this, but because of the steep slopes, we're not positive that larger vehicles like 18-wheelers using it during icy weather would be able to stop in time through a traffic signal either. We have concerns with that as staff. And if you're going northbound towards downtown and you have to stop at a signal, we think there could be problems with people actually going up the hill afterwards in icy weather.
We want to get to yes. We really, because we need improvements at that intersection. I just.
Sure.
Installing a traffic signal is.
You'll never get me to support.
Yeah, I just don't know at 45 miles per hour with how that sets up there. I just don't know.
Well, I mean, hopefully we're reducing the speed limit too.
Which we have control over now.
Yeah.
There is that issue about that getting up that hill with trucks coming from outside of town towards downtown. And I think that's one thing that I have noticed that makes this most scariest part of that is you've got, I think, on a place where trucks are starting to speed up and get into that 50 and 60 mile an hour to make that hill. If you put in any kind of slowing down improvement in that part of it, you're going to end up with some kind of frustration, either stuck trucks or people running over the tops of the, I see this happening over in, see the far end of DeBarco where that one roundabout is now, you see tire marks go across the top of the turnaround. The
I've only done
roundabout.
that a couple times, Carl.
Is that only yours? Okay. There was one went across to some of the grass and stuff, so.
Well, I get that and respect that though. There's a lot of times that traffic is backed up well below the bottom of that hill and trucks are still making it up there just fine.
In
It'll
the
back
dry
up
times.
almost to DeBarco, many a day. And
why I like
they
there to be
still
all-
have to trudge up by mining just fine, and they get up
That's
that hill
just
just
for
fine.
mining.
What do you want to do? Slow it down?
Well, here's the problem, you know, like Rhea's saying, and I think Kelly can attest to this. There's multiple factors in that intersection. And that intersection is not like a plain Jane intersection.
No.
So you've got a steep hill coming from the east side of DeBarco down to that. You've got a steep hill coming up on the west side of DeBarco, right? Then you've got downhill on the north side of 211, and they're coming uphill on the south side of 211. And so you've got hills all the way around, which is what creates the visibility issue to begin with. Now, professionally, I can tell you, since they have fixed that intersection, there are less accidents at that intersection. But you know, that's a tough one. Do you try and slow traffic down? Maybe you change the speed limit. Maybe people pay attention to it. That'll be a policing issue for us. You know, as far as, again, you've got trucks and things moving downhill, trying to maintain their momentum, getting up through town. And as Rich just said, you know, just from the light at mining, you get traffic backed up all the way sometimes down.
Well, I
the
was
hill.
thinking about that with that light too, how that would add to that.
It'd be way worse, you know? And so I think that's maybe I think this is a topic for maybe a different time, because this is a broader, this is not just.
But I would like to tackle 211 DeBarco. You know what I mean? Just as
Sure. I think this is a bigger issue than just something we'll be able to talk about tonight.
It's more than DeBarco too, because I think there is a Bornstead issue for me, and there's some other things we forgot it on the list of taking care of that curve just as you bypass Arleta Court. That corner is going to have to be figured out so we can get traffic out of Arleta Court.
Well,
onto
and then we're going to
26
have
or
the
211.
new addition of Gunderson coming out on 211, just
That's right.
right past that as
Yeah.
well. That's now open. I noticed the other day. So, yeah, so I think just a bigger.
Yeah.
We have an additional traffic that, because of not having the bypass, they line up and come down right by your house on Langston, right down the Barco to turn left on the 211 that backs up as well. So that it's just adding.
Gotta figure out what that's all about. I talked to a couple, 3 different truckers and the chief a little bit. And it's still a little bit weird for me why you would want to go down Langenstein and then DeBarco to get to.
Because I think
211.
Kathleen had it at the last meeting.
That's what I was gonna say. My professional, what I've learned in my professional world is everyone's running these GPSs and as traffic backs up. In the past, if we didn't know it was there, we just stayed and continued on. Now, Waze or Google Maps is pushing us off on these side streets and it's creating additional traffic.
And it's a tight turn when you turn left off of 26 on to 211 and going down that path for those trucks to turn on that. That's not an easy.
Which brings me up to a point, you know, that Jeremy's brought up before. Maybe as a city, that needs to be no truck traffic.
Yeah, truck route.
Yeah, no, not a truck route, period.
Well, we're going through some residential country, don't run DeBarco.
And
there.
then maybe that's what I'm saying. Then maybe that needs to be no trucks.
Well, it is now, right?
It's not posted.
They can drive it.
No, there's no limits.
All right, let's keep going. Sorry to.
Right.
No, you're good. I was just gonna add, so we have some flexibility here. I know it says install a traffic signal, but this is a TSP, it's pretty high level. I mean, I can talk to Kelly on the side here, maybe he'll tell me I'm crazy, but if a traffic signal is not the preferred or maybe the solution for here, and we need to look at it a little bit more, we can always use a little looser wording. Maybe it says install a traffic signal or roundabout and safety measures, right? And I mean, so we can always beef up that description a little bit if we want, as long as the cost estimate goes with it. Because right now it seems very specific, right? You install a traffic signal, that's the only solution. So if we need some more flexibility with what we want to do with that location, we definitely can do
Yeah, I think adding the word roundabout or other alternative solutions would be the way to go, because I don't know if
Okay.
we have enough right away there, and because of the location of Tickle Creek as well.
Mhm.
Being right there, I don't even know if a roundabout would be feasible, but I think it would be nice to just expand it and have alternate safety features as well in the description.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds good. Because yeah, we're not going to get to the nitty gritty of every project through this process to know exactly what we want. So if we can be a little flexible, I think that would be good.
Major.
I'm gonna get my
Good discussion.
turn around the circle and we'll see if it works. No. Kidding, Chief.
As I say, just go down the street.
I'll get you something bigger to drive. Try it then.
Yeah.
Mayor doing cookies and.
Yeah, we'll take pictures.
So the next slide is looking at potential high priority solutions for walking. So these include a lot of sidewalk infill projects and quite a few enhanced pedestrian crossing projects. A lot of the sidewalk infill projects are high priority because of their proximity to specific type of land uses, like schools or parks, or some retail areas where we know there's a lot of need for walking in that area. And then I know a lot of the crossing projects are located downtown, either adding a crossing or updating some crossings, just because of the current conditions not being what they need to be. And then C5 all the way through, I think, C15, those came from safe route to school plans that were put together for the middle school and the Sandy grade school. And we felt like those all are really good candidates to be high priority projects because they are in safe route to school plans and would be very, effective safety improvements for the kids that are walking in that area. And then the last 4 projects are also crossing improvements. And I want to say they came, Doc, I don't know if you have to answer me. I think those might have came from the transit master plan. I know we pulled all of those projects in here as well.
Yep, this is Doc. Those are all transit projects, and it's mostly to improve access to the main transit center right there.
Okay.
Downtown.
All right, thanks. Yeah, that's what I thought.
And
So, oh, go ahead.
I guess I'd like to ask a little bit about options for, sidewalk infill on Bluff Road. We got some of it with the high school, but there's still sections along Bluff Road and it's kind of a safe routes to school thing.
Okay.
At least between Kelso and we should have at least a sidewalk on one side of Bluff Road between Kelso and the middle school.
Okay, we can add that. At least initially. Anybody else? Any other maybe places where you think it's a high priority to walk and we don't have it listed?
I will, I was the one involved a lot with all the trails on their trails master plan. And the last time we did this, there was kind of this, the TSP and all that, the 2011 one, there was this kind of, whose project is it? Who's going to pay for it? Well, it's not in this plan or it is in that. Can you kind of clarify now what the company line is for multimodal trails versus, sidewalk in? Because with the whole Parks and Trails master plan, we have some off-road trails, we have some multimodal trail, we have some, some connections that we need to make are obviously sidewalks.
Mm-hmm. So you're right. It's really hard to kind of split those two apart because they're for people walking and biking, but they are kind of different plans and sometimes different funding sources. So right now, the way we've split them, if it's a sidewalk, on a public street, or if it's crossing on a public street, we have it in the TSP. And then if it's a trail, say within a park, we'll be showing it for connectivity, make sure we're connecting, but we don't have those projects. And I don't believe we pulled any of the on-street trails into the TSP. Sorry, I don't believe any of those are high priority. I guess I'd have to go back and look. I think we have quite a few trail projects in our pedestrian project list, but none of them were high priority, so they're not showing up on this. So I think if it's walking or biking and it's in the public right away, we want to have it in the TSP. That's where I kind of draw the line. And then we just want to look at off-street trails to connect to them, but we don't want to have those as projects because they're not in public right away. They're in parks or other locations. I know Kelly wants to correct me, but I think that's where we've drawn the line for this.
Yeah, I think that sounds correct. I did want to just let everybody know too, we've been coordinating, having DKS and ESA, who is our Parks Master Plan consultant, coordinate. And I think we actually are going to meet one more time still, I believe.
Yeah, we want to have them review everything again.
Yeah, so it is definitely a coordinated effort, and Tracy Johnson with ESA has made sure to be coordinating with Rhea and her folks at DKS. So I do want to just reassure you that we are making sure everything's kind of buttoned up and tied together.
And this is Doc. We did include, I can't remember what the classification was, but it's I think it was the priority trails projects. And like Rhea said, none of them are ranked as high priority right now, but we do have them on the biking map, those high priority ones. So they're shown in the plan.
Oh, on the next map, yeah. Okay, thanks, Doc. So any other locations for walking that you guys think we're missing for high priority? And again, it's a really long list. This is just what we had for high priority. The list actually includes every sidewalk gap on a collector or an arterial in town. No? Okay. Same thing, but for biking projects. These are what came out for high priority, again, because they were close to schools or land uses that made sense for bikes. I believe all of these are like widen shoulders or add bike lanes. Yeah, the rest are they're all widen shoulder or add bike lane projects. And I think almost all of these are some pretty high classification roads. 362nd Bluff, Mornstead, DeBarco, Lincolnson. You guys can see them all. They're shown on the map as well. And then on here, you can see where the trails are for the green dash with yellow or yellow dash on green. And they're marked with a T. So we pulled all of those in from the Parks and Trails Master Plan, but yeah, none of them were high priority, at least not yet. So I mean, I guess the feedback we would like from you guys as far as biking and trails, what you think the highest priorities are.
And can I add something to that too, Rhea? I think one thing we would like feedback on too is if we do end up updating our SDC methodology for parks and trails, which I assume we'll be looking at doing in 2022, and then potentially even for transportation as well. What kind of split we'd be looking at doing for some of these projects as well? Because I think there's certain projects that could get funding from both parks SDCs and transportation SDCs, but we would need to decide on the split and what projects those would be, what projects would qualify for that split, I guess is how I would summarize it.
Anyone?
Not for any of us, is it?
Everyone's quiet. It's perfect. If we got it perfect, we can keep going.
Yeah, I mean, I just bring it up because I think it's a question that we should discuss in the future. And tonight's probably not the right night for that. Don't get me wrong, but I just wanted to kind of lay it out there that I think we should have a future discussion about that very thing.
And I would add to that, Kelly. So when we meet with this group again, we'll have a detailed project list that'll also include cost estimates and the funding strategy. So that's where we get to the place where we say, oh, developer will likely pay for this, or ODOT pays for this, or it's like Kelly said, it's a 50-50 split with parks and the city, and it's an on-street trail. So we're going to start to get to that type of detail the next round, but it's good to start thinking about it.
All right, I think we're ready to move ahead.
With that said, all right, everybody's Full of bikes, good.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see you there. Go for it.
Oh, sorry, hand.
In the original report, maybe you can remember, they're not listed here, some of those streets with striping and adding bike lanes eliminated street parking. Can you remember which streets those were?
Meaning the
I don't.
I have the document open, I can. look at it.
It's showing DeBarco at the west end.
Okay, I have it, I can kind of rattle through them. There are a number where, and I think a lot of these projects we carried over from the old TSP, and I think it was just a matter of right-of-way issues and the cost to actually widen the road to, do the full bike lane and keep the parking. But it's gonna be B2, which is Bluff Road. That's south of 26, B4, which is DeBarco from 362nd to Eldridge. B5, which is also DeBarco from Sandy Heights to Melissa. Langeson from US 26 to the UGB. Meinig from Scenic to 26 and from Barker Court to DeBarco. Those are two projects, B7 and B8. And Sandy Heights from Bluff Road to Tupper. So I guess that's really project B2 through B9. We currently have them costed as restriping projects. We can recost them to be widening projects, but they are from the older TSP, and I think the idea there was probably that the cost of the right of way and the full widening would be a little prohibitive.
Okay, thanks, Doug. So I guess we need to make a decision if we want the project cost to go up to retain the on-street parking, and if on-street parking is maybe more important on some of these than others.
Barco Road, especially as you develop more high density residential right there, is going to, on-street parking is going to be a huge necessity because it's going to go somewhere. And so I think to take that away is going to have huge effects.
Well, I can think of other things. Langensan is the same sort of concern. There's a number of houses on that road that do utilize that parking. If you take one side or the other out, you effectively reduce the parking by half or so. The question comes in my mind is it really crucial to have? Now, downtown, there's always been a lot of conversations about not enough parking, taking things out. We've recently had this corners with the ADA stuff that's happening. They're taking out several parking spots. That's always a concern for me. But in the residential areas, bicycling is at least, and safety is at least as important as some of the parking. People can park in their driveways, in their apron. They don't park in their garage very often, but at least that's something that's an alternative.
Well, I agree, but the high density residential that we're putting in those areas is going to be what it is. And I can't remember, Kelly, you can probably answer this off the top of your head, but how many parking spots are we mandating for a residence as well as an apartment?
You mean off-street parking spaces?
Yes, off-street.
Off-street, it's 2 spaces per single family home or duplex. So a duplex could have 2, as you guys know now. And then for an apartment or a condo, if you have 2 bedrooms, it's 2 spaces. And if you have 1 bedroom or it's a studio, then it's 1.5 spaces.
And then you also require on-street parking.
That is correct for single family homes or duplexes or townhomes, not for apartments though.
I don't think it's just high residential. I mean, I admit I'm biased because I live on Barco. But I live where it's down in the gully. And if you take all the parking away, and I have 3 kids, 3 families, there's nowhere, I mean, they're gonna park a quarter of a mile away. It's not like there's another side street just down around the corner because of the uniqueness of Barco right through there. It just, I mean, I'm a bicycler too, and I understand that, but it just seems a sledgehammer to a small.
So, choice between a bike route and a safe bike route, really, because people are biking those roads now in the street or on the sidewalk. Seen a few of them on the sidewalk. Or are you going to have more parking? So which one do you pick?
Is it a problem?
There you go.
At this-
Is it a problem?
Like,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think that's, I guess
Yeah.
that's the.
Because
where I
like
would
in some of
start.
those areas, right, like let's look at DeBarco, not to say that, hey, if you don't build it, that they will come, right? But how much bike traffic do we get going down DeBarco? Bike traffic, and then in certain areas, is it the end of the world if they have to ride on the road? I mean, bicyclists, people who commute that way are used to riding on the road. I'm not excusing it or saying that we should look over the other. I'm just saying that maybe we're concerned about something that's not.
And we're not Portland.
Such a big deal.
And I just say that we're not a big urban community. We
Yeah.
still have nearly 60% of our folks that are in the commuter shed going to work every day, right? And so these folks need cars. Like you can't make the case that we should be encouraging bicyclists,
Right.
and all this. We live in Sandy, like we've got to drive to commute, and so we need somewhere to park those cars.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I'm thinking about the apartments there across the street from Jaderney and what's the one that you're off?
The
of?
DeBarco apartments.
Yeah, right. There's a lot
Cascade
of
Drive.
bicycles in there. I mean, kids. is what
Yeah,
that
but
is.
hopefully they're not playing on the street.
Yeah.
I know in an ideal world, but I mean, I would hope.
They're on
kids aren't-
Davis in the back.
I would hope kids aren't playing on the street.
Yeah.
I think if you ask me. Well, no,
Yeah, one thing I would say from a planning perspective is having bicycles share the road on like the highway would be a very bad idea. But I'm actually a big proponent of sharrows, which means that bikes are sharing the road on local and collector streets. And what it actually does is typically it actually improves safety as long as bicyclists are wearing reflective clothing and lights and stuff in the evenings or in the nights. It actually slows down vehicular speeds when there's bicyclists using the same actual area. So from a planning perspective, I could see it actually being very beneficial for safety actually to have the like portions of DeBarco Road remain shared between bicyclists and motorists.
Hey, Kelly, can I just jump in on that then? So one of the things we could offer to do is go take a look at all of these segments where we're saying to add bike lanes and look at the speeds and the volumes and see if they are compatible with sharrows. Because typically, as long as it's less than 35 miles an hour and less than 3,500 cars a day, that's kind of the safe spot for sharrows. So we can definitely go look at all these and see if that's something that we should be recommending, and maybe we don't need to, go all the way to bike lanes.
Yeah, so that
And then-
I would highly recommend that. Just for example, Pleasant Street, which is not a collector, but the Pleasant Street master plan looked at incorporating sharrows to so all the on-street parking would remain, and so that speed limits would be lowered, especially around the elementary school, because we would actually be expecting bicyclists to also share the road. So I just want to give a local example of one that we're already looking at incorporating.
Okay. Well, and I was also going to offer, we can also go look at all of these places where there are segments of on-street parking and just do a quick, is it being utilized? And then is there any other alternative place to park? Because like you mentioned, DeBarco doesn't have anywhere even close to it, but some of these might. If it's a small segment of a road that's next to, a bunch of local neighborhood streets, and you could just park around the corner, and that doesn't seem to be utilized. That might also help us maybe decide the level of the impact that the bike lanes could be having on the on-street parking. So we can take a finer look at all of these.
Hold for a second. Did you have a point you wanted to finish?
Well, I was just gonna say that the way DeBarco down there has kind of played out. And we talk about safety. As a bicyclist, I'm more worried if I'm on a street that has front to back cars on both sides and it's kind of narrow in the middle. And DeBarco, just the way it works is kind of, cars are here and here, and it's a wider road to start with down there. we ride it all the time and feel very safe because of those. It's not boxed in. And the other thing that I thought of is just by eliminating street parking takes a good bit of the day away from any parking at all. Like right now at night, the bicyclists on the Barco, even with increased bicyclists in the future, are not going to be riding a whole lot at night.
Right.
Not, yeah, we'd be saying you can't park there.
Right. Right.
You can ride a bike down there,
Right.
but you cannot park at 3 o'clock in the morning,
Right.
but you cannot park. That's a good point.
Great point.
So,
Hollis, you've had your hand up for a little bit.
Thanks. I just wanted to add that I appreciate everything that's been said here, and especially Kelly's comments about the shared road. Of course, in order for that to work, it means we're going to have to enforce the speed limits, because I actually love DeBarco in terms of riding. It is a wider road and it's very comfortable on a bike. If 70% of the trips that we're talking about are within the city limits, then I think we really do want to think about bikes as a mode of transportation. I was lucky enough to get an electric bike a few years ago, and it's changed the way I move around a lot. And I think there's a lot of people, I mean, that is going to happen, more and more electric bikes. And so I think if we think about connectivity with bikes within the city limits, people can bike to work if they work and live within the city or just outside the city, and certainly to go get groceries and stuff. So I agree with not taking away parking when we don't have to, but in order to share the roads, which is probably the better alternative for a lot of this, it's going to require that we have enough staff with the police department to enforce the speed limits.
I was just gonna say one thing. I have small kids. We ride around, and I think the shared areas, we felt safe in that. I'll bring this all the way back to the first part of the discussion. Unless we have a bypass, I am scared to death to have my kids ride to town, and they always want to go up to the Dutch Brothers or whatever. But no, I know you're so old, but I still don't trust Highway 26 and you want to bike. So that liability comes back to certain areas of town. Yes, that works, but how do we, I think, I don't know if there is a way around that one until bypass comes, but our town is split in half unless we had some other way of getting across that Highway 26.
Okay.
I want to make sure that in our development code going forward for the minor residential arterials and possibly even the collectors, that, we need to kind of go into this planning that we want, parking on both sides and a bike lane to be able to kind of accommodate this in the future. I think there's so much of what we have now is because we didn't really have the code or the design standards written to accommodate what we think we're going to need. And the other thing I would say is that, the way we planned that, when you look at our Parks and Trails master plan, there's trails, you see all those T's on this, the idea there was that it really is cheaper to, do, a lot of those will start out as 6-foot or 10-foot packed gravel trails that we may eventually pave when we get the funding for it, but that's a lot cheaper than trying to do these really, expensive bike trails or, bike lanes on existing roads. And I think that was the intent, was to try, obviously you can't take a road bike on a packed gravel trail, but, Tipple Creek, the community members, when they want to go ride down to Freddy's or whatever, they get on their bike and they ride that trail. So I think from a transportation standpoint, all those trails are designed to accommodate some of that bike traffic so that we don't have to have all those bike lanes on the roads. So,
well, yeah, the only thing I would add to that, Kathleen, is if you're riding a mountain bike, but you're not going to ride a road bike.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I said. Yeah.
And so because that's
right.
Yeah. Right. But, most people, they have they have mountain bikes, they have, gravel bikes, they have electric bikes and all that. So
My Peloton can't do it.
Peloton can't get down the stairs.
Rich, you had a question?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if this is the spot to bring it up, but we're having lots of conversations about arterials and all the other types of roadway. And I was under the impression we were going to get away from using the word typical in our transportation plan, and it's all over under all the different types of arterials. And I know that creates a lot of challenges for development, whether it's clear and objective and all that. And so in every one of the arterials that I read here in collectors, it uses the word typical. I thought we were getting away from that.
Development. And yeah, in the development code, you would never want to put that in there. You're 100% correct. So it's a very good point, and we'll take a closer look at that when we're polishing up the, this is only a technical memorandum, but when we're polishing up the TSP, the final version, we'll make sure to polish that up and make sure that the code changes reflect that.
Great point, Reg. Thank you.
The other thing I will add is that I want to make sure that, at least for these, minor arterials and all, that when we get this, the location of where these at should at least have some sort of a windshield survey done. Because what we ran into with Gunderson was, where it was on the TSP, everybody just looked at it and said, oh, that won't work. Say what? Why do we have it in that location on the TSP? You could have done Google Street View and figured out it wasn't going to work. So I'm not looking for a lot of on the ground surveys, but I'm hoping that we have, when we put these things on maps, that we have enough assurances that, we're in the ballpark for locating a road there, that it's not going to violate some obvious visibility or, intersection connectedness and all that kind of, whatever the rules are. So I'm hoping that, given that we're spending all this money, that the locations are at least kind of looked at with some, some level of feasibility, I guess.
Well, I think that's a great comment, I will say. I do a lot of TSPs like this, but I'm also the traffic engineer for a lot of small cities. So I do a ton of development review, picking up the TSP and applying it to developments. And I agree, the last thing you want in your document is to have garbage. So when you're in a pre-application meeting or working, on the conditions of approval, and all of a sudden it doesn't make sense. So yeah, I'll be working with Kelly in the city to make sure that this is all feasible and is going to work for you guys in the future when you start to implement it.
Yeah, it's an excellent point. The other thing we need to keep in mind is natural resources such as wetland. You don't want to have a planned arterial going right through a giant wetland. So good point.
Yeah.
Councilor Walker.
Paula, your hand up.
Yeah. I wanted to follow up on what Councilperson Walker said, which is I look at all these little trails and her comment that those could be used for bikes. I don't think everybody has a mountain bike, but that does seem like it would be low hanging fruit if that would provide more connectivity, if we could pave some of those. So I'm wondering, is that in this transport, is that being looked at, like the paving of the trails that could possibly be paved as part of this?
We haven't yet.
Sure who that's.
Yeah, we've just grabbed all of the trail plans, all of the trails that are planned in the Parks and Trail Master Plan and showed those, but I don't know how far we've gone to look at paving some of those.
No, trails are planned to be paved because they are multi-use.
Okay.
Bikes.
Okay, thanks.
So just to clarify, so is the intent to maybe the first step is getting like a gravel trail in, and then eventually it becomes paved? Like it's at a multi-construction process?
Once, if funding is an issue or something, we may start off with packed gravel and then just, then you've got the option.
Okay.
Another grant, you can go ahead and pay them.
Okay, that makes sense. Right, is that it?
Oh, I had one other thing on that, on the trails and stuff. A real important, critical thing, Jeremy kind of brought it up, is just this whole connectivity for example, like the Tickle Creek Trail and crossing 211 and 362nd. And one of the things that, we were hoping to do with that was kind of do this win-win type project for, there's some culverts at those locations that are not really fish friendly. And so you have this opportunity to kind of, it's a fairly big project, I can imagine, but we've done it in other places, along the spring water and all that, as you go in there and put in, a fish friendly fish passage there, and at the same time create a trail along the creek there, so they can go under the road along the creek rather than trying to do something over the road or on the road. So those were, when you look at that Parks and Trails master plan, there are a couple of possible under the road passages along the creek. But like I said, kind of combining it with some fish, and there's always millions of dollars for fish projects. Right. I was kind of hoping to tie into that, to get those crossings for, the pedestrians and the bikes.
All right. All right, I think we can move ahead.
All right, I have to say, for a group that was silent for 30 seconds when we started talking about bikes, that turned into a very good discussion.
We tend to surprise people. We like-
Well, just you were quiet and then all of a sudden everybody had lots of opinions about bikes. That's good. All right, so let's keep moving. Solutions for transit. I will admit this is directly from your brand new transit master plan, but we do want to make sure that we're incorporating those recommendations and projects into the TSP as well. But most of their projects are related to service improvements. There's quite a few routes that they're looking at adding. And then some of them are more operational, like adding a bus and a driver. Some of them are more like, make sure we're coordinating with TriMet and other agencies. And then there are a couple pedestrian improvements that pop up here that we also have in the pedestrian section as well that we pulled from here. And then the figure on the right, I just grabbed one of the many recommendations they have for some newer expanded service in the area, but I think this one's pretty popular with the shopper shuttle. I don't know if you guys had any question on transit. I guess it's kind of a different mode for us just because you just redid your master plan. So we're mostly just trying to tie it in and reflect what that plan is recommending, and then making sure it ties in if we have any other, walking, biking, or driving improvements, just to make sure it's all coordinated.
Andy's listening. We all love transit. We
Yep,
just
exactly.
adopted this plan though.
Sure. Well, that one survey, all it said was transit and SAM and bus. And so there's definitely some love, I think, for transit.
Yep.
Anything else?
We're good.
No? Okay. Okay, so we've gone through all of that. So now we got to talk a little bit about money and finance. So with Mike's help, we took a deep dive into the historical transportation
What I did there. See how small
revenue that you guys have been collecting, and then also what you've been spending money on. And then we've taken those past averages, again, work with Mike a little bit to make sure they're realistic. And then we've extrapolated them out to the year 2040. So we can get an idea of what do we really think is going to be available the next 20 years to spend on the transportation system and the projects that are in this plan. So when you look on the left and you look at revenue, it looks great. I mean, $42 million sounds like a lot. But then when you get over to expenditures, they get gobbled up pretty fast. So right now our forecast is just over $10 million that we would have to put on our financially constrained project list. And right now, all of the high priority projects that I showed you tonight are about 34 million. So this is when it starts getting tough, is based on that forecast, we can only, and again, different projects have different costs, but right now it's about a third of the high priority projects that we looked at tonight to make that list. So I just like a little bit of feedback from you guys, what type of priorities and projects should we be looking at the next 20 years? Are there some must-haves? Looking back at everything that we have, I mean, our are the crossing projects downtown or by the schools, you know, kind of the most important? Or is it more some safety projects? Or is it all of the motor vehicle capacity projects? I mean, if we have to make them all compete, I'm curious what your guys' input would be on that.
Rhea, this is Jordan.
Yeah.
$1 billion number. So it doesn't include projects that are currently funded in the existing TSP. So projects that are underway. So this
Correct. Yeah,
planning.
so if it's funded, then we didn't show them on the high priority project list either, I don't believe.
There was a couple that you touched on.
Oh, well, maybe 32nd Bell.
Right.
Yeah, so correct. But this would be all for, yeah, for new projects that don't have any funding tied to them yet.
Okay.
Anyone jump in?
Yeah, I was just going to say that the projects that were as valued as part of the school to work, or I mean, bike to work, or
the safe routes to school.
We called it. Yes, safe routes to school. Thank you. I think those are really critical because our whole nation is facing an epidemic of obesity, and the safe rides to school is going to be helpful for our kids to stay healthy. So I think it's really critical that we make it safe for them to do that. So that was my only comment.
Just so you know, Commissioner, there's also a lot of grant funding for that too right now, and I think it's only going to increase. So
Okay, great.
We barely missed out on a grant for Safe Routes to School last year. We were 43rd, I think, out of 90 applicants, and they funded the first 41, so we barely missed it.
Yeah.
And I've been told that we will get funding. That's what they told me at least.
Okay, great, thanks.
Carl?
Yeah, some of the things I've heard from some of our emergency services folks, Phil Schneider, is the ambulances and some of the police, I guess, and it certainly comes up in my mind is getting from one side of the city to the other, finding a way to make a clear path. That's what that 362nd to Bell Street is all about for me, is finding a way to get to one side of the city or the other, depending on how we need to. And as we grow, and as that number on the highway turns from 30 to 40,000 cars a day to 50 or whatever it is until we get, if we ever get the bypass, there's going to be more pressure on our emergency vehicles to get from one side of the city and the other. So in my mind, there's a big picture calculation analysis about how we maintain those clear paths to get from one spot to the other. And also it's about the problem that we're seeing on Langensan to DeBarco with trucks. How do we get our traffics, not just our truck traffic, but our commuter traffic that goes from the Bailey Meadows place, for example? That was, to me, that was just one fiasco after the other. It seemed like getting those cars that are kind of in the back end of our city out into the main highways without overcrowding all those roads during those peak times when everybody's trying to get to work or back from work. And then, of course, I'm thinking about kids and all that kind of stuff. But it seems to me that we ought to really look at safety and being able to make sure that we don't plan ourselves or not plan ourselves into being able to get from one side of the city to the other and make sure those are open transportation lines. To me, that makes some sense for me too.
Can somebody clarify these expenditures on this? Which projects are those? Are those that you're talking about that add up to $31 million?
Oh, I wish Mike was on the call. But I know some of those have to do with some, and Kelly, maybe you can jump in too. I know some of them have to do with obligations that the city has for 32nd and Bell, and I believe some of them have to do with the transfer of 211 as well.
Yeah, so that column all adds up there. It's the, personal services, salaries and benefits, right? Materials and services,
sorry.
Equipment, operations, all
Right,
that.
but which projects are we,
For capital would be, this is me guessing, but also I think it's an educated guess. It's probably the pavement preservation program funded by the local gas tax. And then debt service is the full faith and credit for Bell 362nd in there. And then transfers out is probably the administrative overhead charges.
I can confirm that what you said, Jordan, is correct. Yes.
That was Tyler.
Sorry, yeah, I didn't announce that. That's Tyler. I just couldn't get myself unmuted fast enough to answer before Jordan jumped in. So
that's not really any of the projects at all that have all those D1, D, all those. Doesn't include any of those.
Right.
That's just kind of.
That's what the 10 million. Maybe another way to look at it is system development charges fund a lot of these type of capacity increasing projects, and you have 10 million, available until 2040, and there's 9.2 million that's estimated to generate from SVCs in that same amount of time, right? Because we've already committed our local gas tax and pavement preservation. We've committed a lot of the increase in the highway trust fund, the gas taxes, and the VRF to debt service for 362nd. And so it's just, I'm trying to simplify where the funding would be coming from to pay for the projects in the TSP. I think one of the conversations down the road in the TSP process is increasing SDCs as another way to fund more projects.
Well, and also I think what I was advocating for was that as soon as that development starts happening in there, that we somehow find a way, and I'm talking about 362nd, to recover, do the cost recovery agreements or something so that we can get some of that, have development pay for that rather than, because now what we're doing is taking that money that we'd normally be using to upgrade our streets and things like that for existing residents and using it to build Bell Street. And I want to see that recovered and, made whole on the maintenance side for our local streets.
I think that's the
what's intended.
plan. That's the SDCs,
Yeah.
and that was the whole plan. So
Right.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, are there any other comments, I guess, on the priorities? I want to make sure everybody gets their fair shake and what stays and what goes.
It's this was a kind of a fire hose, and I'm a little bit.
Sure, I completely understand that too. I guess just high level, I was curious if anyone had even like a favorite project that they saw tonight that they would be very disappointed if it didn't happen in the next 20 years. Okay, well, great. Do you have a second choice?
Well, you asked.
No, I love it. It needs a few more zeros than that 10 million right there.
Rhea, I have a comment. Jordan again. I noticed on the Highway 211 project, one thing that might be helpful is that if there was a way to break that up, to Councilor Walker's question, and again, back to the DeBarco 211, is there a way to think about that project in smaller chunks of thinking about the Tickle Creek crossing, the intersection improvements there, but also the project itself is listed as an improvement to a minor arterial. And I think that's a big pill to swallow, instead of like, is there a way to look at just a sidewalk project without the other, widening and other things that come with it. So just something I picked out. I noticed that it might be easier to prioritize a project that's not so expensive that we can take care of some of the safety concerns first.
Sure, and we're kind of answering or trying to solve different problems, right, with one project. So I can appreciate that. I think the capacity issue with the signal roundabout's one thing. But yeah, starting looking at that corridor beyond it is a different question. Yeah, so we definitely could have a corridor project and have an intersection capacity project too. And they may be phased right differently.
Carl? Yeah, one of the things that we've done in the past is to sit down with council, I think even with planning commission, and look at some of these big projects that we don't have on our current list and see if we can't add ones that really make some traction with this. And I thought I heard some of them tonight, like the DeBarco and 211 intersection. What's going to happen there? How's that going to work? There's some other, I've heard of some lighting up and down 26. There's some other things that probably could come bubbling out if we had a chance to sit down and think about what to do with that $10 million. We have a good reputation being able to spend money. So I suspect we could find a way to take that 10 million and put it something besides the bypass, because I think that's something the state needs to work on too.
We'll
So
work together on that. All
I
right.
can disagree, but I think it would be worth it. And again, that it was an educational time for me to be able to sit there and listen to all the other projects that people had on their minds that made some sense to them. And it convinced me that I should support their ideas, or just some things that bubbled out that we wouldn't have seen otherwise. So I think it might be worth it to sit down and say, we got $10 million in the next 20 years. How do you spend that?
All right.
One thing I'll add is that the majority of, just to remind everybody, or maybe I think Rhea kind of alluded to this, is that the project list is from 2011. And so we're carrying over the main projects from that TSP. And then we're adding some projects that were mentioned in the transit master plan, the safe routes to school plan, and some other projects through, like, there's like one project from the Pleasant Street master plan and different planning objectives such as that. There's been very few projects on the high priority list that are just kind of added from staff. I can only think of like one or two, and they're very small. The other thing as well to keep in mind, and I don't think we went through this, but there's also some additional, and I know it's kind of hard to spend money on this, but there's also some additional planning work that I think needs to be prioritized in the transportation system plan. And a few of those are looking at the Wolf Drive and Ten Eyck Road and US 26 intersection, and seeing what we can do there to make it safer, especially going into 7-Eleven. I think we need to look at posted traffic signs east of our downtown out to our UGB, because we have heard through land use matters that there's concerns at the two Vista Loop intersections. So I think those would be two really good things for the city council to consider, to put money aside to look at more through another planning objective, essentially like a refinement plan that's more focused than this TSP is.
Yep. All right. Well, good session. Good work session. You need anything else out of us, Jordan? Are we good?
No, this was a work session, so I think the conversation is very helpful for consultants and the staff to hear. And I'm like you, I think I'm looking forward to the next phase too, and the next surveys, and hearing what the public feels about these priorities. And Kelly did make a good point that a lot of these projects have been identified. We're moving forward on a couple of the big ones, but there's still a lot on the existing TSP priority list too that I think we'll see pop up again. But yeah, thank you for the planning commissioners, both home and in attendance today, and council for the work session.
Yeah, very helpful. Thank you for all the presenters and consultants who participated. Thank you to staff for the work done on this, and to planning commission. And as we were all out in the community and we ask about what we need to be focusing on, we continually hear traffic and transportation issues among the very top, if not the top priority. And we're making some good headway in some different things. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yes.
With that, I will close this work session. All right, I'm going to call the city council meeting to order to discuss this item. Is there a motion?
I move to authorize the city of Sandy to participate in the national opioid litigation settlement, and to delegate authority to the city manager to sign the release and interstate agreement once they are final, and contingent upon the review and approval of the documents by the city attorney.
I'll second that.
There's a motion by Councilor Sheldon and a second by Councilor Petzold. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. I now will close the city council meeting. All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Appreciate it.